It's nice for us every year to get together as we are today and tomorrow and yesterday, and we have a lot of business to cover, so we're on a somewhat tight schedule, and we're going to move around and take care of all of the particular issues. There are some slight changes in the agenda as you received in your book, as certain things have changed in the last couple of weeks since it was printed. So we will begin the activities today with the Pledge of Allegiance. Barbara.
I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, Barbara. Before we move into the roll call, I just want to spend a few minutes talking about one of our directors, Boots Dunn. As all of you know, he passed away earlier this month at the age of, I think, 85, 86. And he was one of the good guys in our industry. In our book is somewhat of a history of Boots. And I want to take, again, a couple of minutes to talk about some of the things that he did. You know, he was involved in our industry since 1946. Scary as that is, that was the year I was born. But as an amateur driver, 1,152 winning drives, and I believe most ever by an amateur. Over the last 10 years, he received so many awards, a great Pennsylvania harnessman. He was honored in 2014 as the Ironman Award for his 60-plus years of dedication to Pennsylvania harness racing. He was proud of his heritage. He was proud of this industry and all that he gave to it. He was a director for so many years with us. And I would like to now take a moment of silence, please. Thank you very much. Now, the next order of business is taking the roll call. Barbara?
Okay. Mr. Antonacci, Mr. Ader, here. Mr. Beagle, here. Mr. Biddle, Mr. Bays, Mr. Brandt, Mr. Brennan, yes. Mrs. Brewer-Patera, yes. Mr. Brown, here. Mrs. Cahill, here. Mr. Crawford, here. Mr. Cross, here. Mr. Descharmes, here. Mr. Feraldo, here. Mr. Ford, here. Mr. Galterio, Mr. Gillott, here. Mr. Gregory, here. Mr. Halls, Mr. Hoovler, here. Mrs. Ingracia, Mr. Johnston, Mr. Kane, yes. Mr. Kenny, here. Mr. Kimmelman, here. Mr. Landis, Mr. Levitt, Mr. Lilly, here. Mr. Lowy, Mr. McKinnon, here. Mr. Marine, here. Mr. Marshall, here. Mr. McCoy, here. Mr. Merkelane, here. Dr. Moffitt, here. Dr. Mossbarger, here. Mr. Nichols, here. Mr. Olford, here. Mr. O'Toole, Mr. Piney, here. Mr. Panaccio, here. Dr. Powers, here. Mr. Rivington, here. Mr. Reynolds, Mr. Rowland, Mr. Rooney, here. Mr. Salvi, here. Mr. Schick, here. Mr. Schnicker, here. Mr. Settlemore, here. Mr. Stratton, Mr. Sweeney, Mr. Tubin, here. Dr. Walker, here. Mr. Wan, here. Mr. Wiles, here. Mr. Yan, here. Vice Chairman, Mr. Williams, here. Chairman, Mr. Axelrod,
Here.
President, Mr. Langley.
Here.
Okay. 47.
47?
But someone answered when I knew they weren't here. Over here.
Well, we're in business. All right, our next order of business is the introduction of new directors. We have 2 new directors this year. District 1, and Skip Hoovler will introduce our new director, track director, Mark Lowy. Where is...
District 1 would like to welcome Mark Lowy from Dayton, Hollywood, and I think he'll be an excellent addition to our board. Mark?
And from District 7, our new director, Rick Gillick, and Sam Beagle will make the introduction.
We were all saddened by the loss of Boots, but Russell and I had some major shoes to fill, and we decided on Rich Gillock. Rich has been a colleague of mine for about 20 years, known him very well. He was the president of the MSOA, and I think he'll make a great addition to our board. Rich?
Thank you. All right, our next order of business is the Northfield Park Track Director election protest. All of you have received a package of information describing the situation in the ballot, in the vote allocation, and the vote that took place, I believe, on January 23rd. Northfield Park believes that our bylaws were not followed properly and has made a protest to that. And that protest is being brought in front of the entire board for evaluation and a decision to be made. The actual vote, and I will repeat it when we get there, our job is to determine that, or if the track director election vote held on the 23rd violated the USTA bylaws so that no valid election was conducted. There are representatives here to speak on this item, to clarify anything in the materials that you read, and then we will open it to discussion among the board members, and at the conclusion of that, we will vote to either uphold the vote that was held on the 23rd or to rule that it was improper. So we're going to start with Northfield.
That'd be fine.
All right. Speaking on behalf of Northfield is Luther Heckman. That would be fine.
Turn it around.
You may do that. You want to look them in the eye?
You guys, but I'd rather face them.
Yes.
Good morning. I've got to say, my name is Luther Heckman. I am an attorney here in Columbus, and I have represented Northfield for some time. Prior to that, I was once upon a time, for about 10 years, chairman of the Ohio State Racing Commission. And before that, I owned horses and raced them, harness horses, which I think are the best kind. I'm here because Brock Milstein and Northfield Park, and in most respects they're synonymous, maybe in all respects, takes this matter very, very seriously, in that he thinks that Northfield Park should be involved with the USTA, and he thinks the USTA should see to it in one way or another that Northfield is involved, particularly on this board of directors. The question in front of you stems from bylaws which, to the best of my knowledge, date back to 1963. on this particular area. There's been a few changes in the Ohio racing law since 1963. I'd say the most major change probably has occurred most recently, and that change has been a change that allows for racinos to be set up at the commercial racetracks that operate in Ohio. Prior to that, though, in '96, there was another substantial change. That substantial change allowed for full card simulcasting in the state of Ohio. Both of those changes have been actively pursued by Northfield Park in terms of trying to get the best business opportunity for Northfield Park and to promote harness racing both in Ohio and nationally. And I think almost all of you are aware, if not all of you, that Northfield Park has and continues to race in excess of 200 days and has for some time, at least since the 90s. And our point has been to, I guess, give the nation a view of Ohio harness horse racing, because we have a very, very active program of promoting our signal outside the state, as I'm sure all of you are aware. The seriousness of the matter first came to Northfield's attention sometime in November prior to the, or maybe it was in December, prior to the election that took place at the combined USTA-OHHA meeting in January. The bottom line question for us at that time could be found essentially in the bylaws, which, if you looked in this book, start on the relevant sections, start on page 99 and then go on page 100 of the book. The question from Northfield's point of view is that pari-mutuel track members shall be entitled to cast votes on a proportional basis determined in direct relation to total net purses paid by track members in each district during the previous calendar year. Then the next sentence goes on to say the number of votes to be cast shall be determined as follows, and it lists items 1 through 6. The end result of the interpretation by USTA counsel and the committee that was conducting the election was that each track in Ohio had 10 votes, with the exception of one, which had 8. And the reason that that was determined to be the way the thing worked was, if you looked at item 6, it said net purses amounting to $5,001,001 and over get 10 votes. The category below that, 8 votes. So 3 tracks received 10 votes that they could cast at the election, and 1 track received 8 votes that they could cast at the election. Obviously, there was no authority by the committee to do other than follow the counsel of the USTA and the staff's suggestion that the counsel of the USTA should be followed, which is why we have contested and protested the election here. Quite frankly, we think that if one examines the purses, it's fairly obvious, and if one considers the state of racing law in Ohio, it's fairly obvious that this particular cap is no longer appropriate if you're attempting to make sure that votes are done on a proportional basis determined in direct relation to total net purses. And the reason we say that is that we've looked at what the total net purses are, and if we did it properly, and we suggested several ways that might be done, Northfield would end up with substantially more than 10 votes, or if 10 votes were the limit, other tracks would end up with substantially less than 10 votes. Capping the purse number at $5 million is not real. It is an interpretation that we feel this board has the authority to set aside. We are not and I want to repeat this very carefully so that you all understand it. We are not objecting in any way, shape, or form to the people who ended up being voted on the board. We like the people. We don't object to them at all. We object to how the votes were counted and how the votes were allocated, not to the people. Our solution is that the bylaws obviously ought to be looked at and updated, but that's for the long term. In the short term, what we would like this board to do is to use its authority and seat the Northfield representative who ran at that election. Brock Milstein believes that Dave Binconi has a lot to offer to the USTA, and we would very much like to see him seated now and figure out what we do to fix this outdated bylaw in the future. I would be glad to answer any questions, and I'll stay here as long as I need to, but I have to tell you in all candor, I do better work at cocktail hour rather than just after breakfast. So if I haven't made clear the Northfield position, and if I haven't made clear why we feel this is of significant importance that we wanted to bring it to the whole board, please ask me any questions, and I'll be glad to try and answer them on behalf of Northfield. I know all of you know this, but Northfield, I think, probably at this point in time is somewhere close to having, when you count on-track and simulcast handle, probably about the second largest in the country, probably after the Meadowlands. I haven't looked in a while, but I think that's what it was when last I checked. And we very much want to be involved by having Dave Binconi on this board. Thank you very much for your attention, and I hope I've been brief enough and clear enough, but I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Thank you. We do have, I think, 2 other people to speak on this, and then I think at the conclusion of that, we can take questions for any of the people that provided input. So Hollywood Gaming, we have a representative for Hollywood Gaming would like to make any comment? Mr. McElrain?
Good morning. My name is Chris McElrain. I'm a director from New Jersey, District 12. Also, I am Vice President of Racing for Penn National Gaming, which owns Hollywood Racing at Dayton Raceway. Luther makes some very valid points. I think this is a pretty simple issue, as Ivan indicated at the beginning, whether the election that took place in January was done correctly under the current USTA rules. As far as I understand, or given the history, it's the same procedure that's been used for the past 50 years for track elections. I would assume there's been hundreds of track elections since that time, all done under the same voting process that was done in January in Ohio. As far as I know, there has not been one objection or one lodged inquiry regarding those type of elections, or how the election was run, what the point structure was, or allocation for those votes. So if, and the voting that took place, I believe, was done in all fairness, and the results announced appropriately. If there is an issue about the allocation or how the votes are determined, that is probably something maybe the board should look at in the future, understanding that it obviously affects more than just District 1, and maybe just the whole structure of the board in general. We would welcome that. But again, we feel that the voting that took place in January most assuredly was done under the proper conduct of the USTA and the USTA rules, and which had been done in the past, never challenged by anyone in regards to those rules. As Luther said, it's nothing personal. We work very well with Northfield Park and with Dave Bianconi, and we're for the betterment of not only racing in Ohio, but harness racing in general. I think we're all here early on a Sunday morning, taking our time to be here and to work on the benefit of harness racing. So I don't think anybody's motives can be questioned from that respect. So again, in terms of how the election was conducted, we feel, and I don't know if USTA attorney is going to speak as well, but I think everything was done according to the rules as they are. Like a lot of USTA rules, they're probably outdated, maybe should be looked at, but that's a future question. In terms of Ohio state law, I don't know if there's any relevance to that in this particular discussion, but we just want to and feel that the USTA rules were followed, and again, if there's something for the future board to determine in that respect, then that's something that maybe the board should take up in a future meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. And the last speaker on this topic, subject to questions from the membership, is the USTA outside counsel, Don Bry.
Thank you, members of the board. I've been asked to speak a little bit about what the USTA did and why it chose to allocate the votes as it did. We're here because under the bylaws, the full board of directors is the sole judge of the election and qualification of its members. So if there's a dispute about whether an election was validly held or who was elected, it comes before the board. It doesn't happen very often. It's happened a couple of other times, at least in my tenure as your counsel, mostly involving the residence of someone who was elected. It is, I believe, true that this is the first time there has been a protest about the number of votes that were apportioned among the various directors in a track director election. And it's also true that there hadn't been a protest before today, but the protest was made. It was identified before the election, and there's no claim that Northfield has failed to preserve its rights to present the protest. When the USTA acts as a judge of was there a valid election or not, because that's really what we're doing here. If the votes were not apportioned correctly, there was not a valid election, and nobody was elected at the end of January. And therefore, there are no directors validly elected for the term beginning at this board meeting, and there would be a vacancy for both of the track director electors that would need to be filled in a future election with 30-day notice and so forth. The strongest argument I think that's been presented is that there seems to be a certain unfairness about the way the second sentence of USTA bylaw 4.05b is. The first sentence says, of course, pari-mutuel tracks shall be entitled to cast votes on a proportional basis in direct relation to the total net purses paid by track members in each district during the previous calendar years. The sentence immediately following says, the number of votes to be cast shall be determined as follows: net purses less than $2,500, 1 vote; net purses amounting between $2,501 and $500,000, 2 votes; net purses between $500,001 and $1.5 million, 4 votes; net purses amounting to between $1.5 million and 1 and $3 million, 6 votes; net purses amounting between $3 million 1 and $5 million, 8 votes; net purses amounting to $5 million 1 and over 10 votes. Now, both of these sentences were enacted the same time in 1963. So even in 1963, proportional was not understood to be strictly proportional, because if it were strictly proportional, if you have $5 million in net purses, you would be receiving 20 votes rather than 10 votes. At the same time, obviously, there have been changes since 1963, not in our bylaws, but there have been changes that move it further out of whack in terms of further away from a rough proportionality. And that question as to whether or not the bylaws should be changed is a question for the will of the board when it's determining whether or not to change its bylaws, this year or next year down the road, rather than to its judgment about what did the bylaws require at the end of January when the vote was held. There are two principles that were articulated by the USTA when it responded to Northfield's request that Northfield and the others have more votes, or that the votes be apportioned in a different way. The first principle of interpreting bylaw is, can the two sentences be reconciled? Is it possible to have a reasonable interpretation of both these sentences so both of them are enforced? And one possible way of doing that, which you may agree with, you may disagree with, is that proportionality never meant strict proportionality. It meant what the second sentence says in terms of how proportional it was going to be, which was never intended to be a strict proportionality. Now, there's a second provision, because you may say, well, look, proportional may have been close enough in 1963, but it's pretty out of whack once we get to 2016, so maybe there wasn't a contradiction then, but as time goes on, there looks like more of a contradiction today. There's also another principle that the USTA articulated, and that was a principle that when there's a contradiction between a general provision and a specific provision relating to the same area, the specific provision applies. Now, why is that important? Well, that's important because the USTA and its staff needs to know when it's helping the directors of a district conduct a director-elected election, how many votes do you apportion to each track? I heard Luther Heckman indicated that they have proposed several ways in which this might be done. And that's the problem. There are several ways in which this might be done if you just look at the first sentence. And the second sentence specifies exactly how it should be done. Maybe it's unfair. And that's a judgment for the board when it's changing its bylaws in terms of things. And I think there's arguments that are addressed properly to the will of the board in terms of what should the allocation be going down the road. But in terms of interpreting what they actually mean and what was required as to the election that took place in January 23rd, 2016. This was a rationale of the USTA. The board has every right to say we were wrong. And the board has every right to say that's not what the rules required. And if the judgment of the board is the rules that existed in January 23, 2016 required that a different number of votes be given that's clear enough so we know what it is, then you have the authority to say so. But if, on the other hand, the board concludes the rules are kind of clear and they might not be fair, but there isn't any other specificity about how to allocate votes among the various tracks, then I would think that the board would conclude that the USTA staff correctly interpreted the rules as best they could, and that the validity of the election should be upheld and the protest overturned. Obviously, I'm not going to tell you how to vote, but this is how the USTA viewed the matter, or the staff did, and now it's up to the board to determine whether they got it right or not. Thank you.
Okay. Now you've received information from three parties. We're now going to open it up to any questions. Luther? Yes. Mr. Heckman would like to respond to.
All of you probably know, or at least if you don't, you should. Don is a very good lawyer, and he's given you a very good lawyerly talk on the matter. I think it ignores the larger question, and we had to bring this matter to the board's attention. A contest of the election and the vote allocation was the way to do it. Proportional is strange to us, when the votes allocated as a result of how it was determined were 10, 10, 10, and 8. And if you examine the net purses at each of the Ohio tracks, you'd think that's not really proportional. But Don's a good lawyer. He said what he had to say. I'll only repeat this. I think this board, as opposed to the committee which conducted the election for District 1, this board has the authority and the ability to find some way to seat Dave Bianconi and not throw off either of the other two people elected at the District 1 meeting. And we would hope that you would consider doing that. We believe that Northfield has something to contribute to the USTA, and we would very much like the opportunity to do that through the board and through the seating of Dave Bianconi. Thank you.
All right. Now, as part of our deliberation phase, I will take any questions or clarifications or comments that anyone has to make. Mr. Williams.
I guess my question would be for Mr. Heckman. We all received a copy of a letter from the Voris law firm, Voris, Sater, Seymour, and Pease in Columbus. Are you a member of that firm, sir?
In answer to your question, the answer is absolutely not. And I have endeavored to bring this matter off of that kind of discussion and into the kind of discussion that I've given you. And I have persuaded Mr. Milstein and Northfield to take this approach.
I'm very glad to hear that. So you would disavow language such as deliberate and malicious effort to circumvent the clear rules of the USTA and so forth?
I wouldn't have written it, and I certainly don't think it should have been written the way it was.
Thank you.
Okay. Any additional questions for any of the parties?
I have a comment.
Oh, well, all right, Mr. Feraldo.
I just, as a point of information going forward, because I think, at least I have a position on how this matter should be resolved. But going forward, what are the actual net purses paid at these various racetracks in the state of Ohio?
Actually, I think the USTA has the answer to that better than I do, but in a general sense, I can give you those numbers from memory. Perhaps Don Bray, who is coming forward, has them actually. But we sought them for 215, and I don't remember them. But the last ones that I have been given, and this does refresh my memory, Hollywood Gaming at Dayton net purses $3.9 million, Miami Valley Raceway $8.3 million, Scioto Downs $11.7 million, Northfield Park $15.6 million.
For informational purposes, this is part of Exhibit 2 of the packet that was sent to you prior to this meeting relating to the District 1 election. And those numbers are right on there, along with how the eligible votes were calculated from that and how the votes were cast.
Any other questions, comments?
I have one.
Mr. Langley.
Having been part of two previous challenges, one when Lon Fractional beat Ted Zorno, and the vote was brought back to the board, and Mr. Zorno was rewarded with a win instead of Lon, who had the most votes. And I was one of 3 votes that supported Lon, and that's probably more than my side will get today. But basically, I read the rule a little different. The rule, there are 2 sentences that are very conflicting to me. The first one is, as Luther pointed out, that the votes shall be done on a proportional basis. And I think that there's never been a protest or never been an appeal just by chance. 1963 was when that rule was put in. And it just happens that as time has gone along, that it has never needed to be changed. And I think in 1963, of course, nobody knows because none of us were here in 1963 to speak of. And I think in 1963, they might have put that sentence in to make it easier either for the districts to understand how many votes each guy would get, and it was sort of proportional at the time, or, God forbid, they wanted to make it easier for the USTA staff to count the votes, and that's a possibility. My feeling is that Northfield, had they not protested before the election, wouldn't have quite the standing that they do since they came up with all the things before the election. They protested, they showed that the proportion was not correct, and they tried to put the rule in being accurate with the first sentence of the paragraph. And it just, I don't know, it just seems to me that they had noticed everybody. They tried to make us aware of how it should be, and I think they did it. But on the other hand, I can't argue with Don. And Luther did, I just inject a little bit of humor here on Don. Luther says that he was very good a lawyer. And I just want you all to know that during the last 8 months, we had a couple of protests on other things from Greg Peck. And he didn't like the way Don was interpreting it. And I said, well, Don went to Yale. He must be a pretty good lawyer. And Greg said, well, it must have been a bad year at Yale. So anyway, thank you.
Mr. Lowy. Mark Lowy.
It's very difficult to follow Luther Heckman, so I've had the honor of sitting next to him and sitting with him at many commission meetings, and he's very intelligent and knows what he's talking about. Again, I think it's important that we understand that what we did this year was follow the bylaws as they are in the book. Whether the bylaws need to be changed or not, that is a topic of discussion that we have to have moving forward. Just for clarification to Mr. Feraldo's question, Northfield does race over 214 days, 24 days, a year-round meet. At the behest of the Ohio Racing Commission, Miami Valley, Scioto, and Dayton have a circuit. So our purses may be significantly less, but we're only racing 75, 90, and 89 days at the 3 properties. So if you took those 3 as a whole, like Northfield's year-round racing, you would see that the purses are pretty equitable. Thank you.
Mr. Hoovler.
This question's for Don. Do we have the ability to seat Bianconi and Mark Lowy and then study the bylaws? That's kind of what I heard. I'm not sure I heard it right. I think Ohio believes these bylaws are antiquated and need studied.
Okay. Mr. Bry.
Yeah. It's a very good question. It's not a question that's a way to resolve a protest hearing, which is what we are here today. In terms of the protest hearing, the protest that was made was as to the number of votes that were allocated. So, the question of can we appoint a new member to the board contrary to what the rules provide in terms of how they are elected, it seems to me you would have to change your bylaws first to enable you to do that. And then if your bylaws enabled you to do that, which requires a 2/3 vote of those present, assuming that you have a quorum and at least a majority of those, then under the changed bylaws, if they authorized you to do that, you could do that. But under the bylaws as they exist right now, there is no authority for the board to add a director to the board in the absence of a valid election, or what it reasonably finds to be a valid election.
I think then the answer to your question, Mr. Hoovler, is no. Well, it's a fair question. Any other questions, comments? All right, one comment, question.
Change the bylaws, so that you have to wait till next year, or change the bylaws today?
Well, I don't know, and I'll get help from someone, if it's a requirement at the USTA that all rule change or bylaw changes go through the districts first before they come before the board, subject to someone telling me that's not necessarily correct, then the answer would be, it would be at next year's board meeting, which would then take place in effect the following year, 2018. I believe that's correct?
Get a legal opinion.
Oh. Mr. Bry, if we were looking to make a bylaw change before next year, is that possible for the USDA to do?
It is. There is an unwritten custom that we go through the various districts and review bylaw changes and rule changes. It is a custom of the board, not a requirement of the bylaws. So it is possible for the USDA, even this year, to change its bylaws this year. It's up to the board whether or not that's wise to do, but it does have the power to do that.
And if the board so desired, then if a change was made, that change would be in effect for...
Yes, it'd be in effect as soon as it's made.
Soon as it's
I believe the rules are effective some months down the road. I don't believe there's a similar provision with respect to the bylaws.
Thank you.
But it would only affect future elections, right?
Correct.
That would impact future elections, yes. I was going to say that Mr. Lowy has, for purposes of this vote, agreed to recuse himself, so he will not be voting when the directors do vote on this issue. And I will take any final questions before we move for a roll call vote we're going to do on this. And I have to go back to my question.
In the outcome of the vote, is that which way the vote would go? Then Mark Lowy, if Northfield would win the vote, Mark Lowy would not be.
Yeah, I'll clarify this when we go into the vote. So the question we're going to vote on is, did the January 23rd, 2016 District 1 track director election violate the USTA bylaws so that no valid election was conducted? So if you believe Northfield's position is correct and the bylaws were violated, then you would vote in that way. If that is the case, that we violated our bylaws, then the election is canceled. Right? And no one will have been elected for the current term. So that there will be no track directors, because the current track directors whose terms expired, they're expired. We don't have a way, according to our bylaws and our council, to have them stay on until new directors are elected. So therefore, we would have 2 vacancies until our board reconvened, and we could do that with 30-day notice. And and a determination made on how the vote should be allocated. So those two things would have to happen. Mr. Feraldo?
But you lost me. If we're voting no on this motion, I'm assuming there'll be a motion in a second. If we're voting no on this motion, then we are basically confirming the election as it is under our current bylaws. Is that correct? So a no vote would be to confirm the election as it is under our existing bylaws.
Now, the question is, did the January 23rd, 2016 District 1 track director election violate the USTA bylaws so that no valid election was conducted? So your interpretation is correct, Joe. Yeah. If you were to vote yes on that, then there would be no results of the election, that the election is invalid. If you were to vote no, that would be saying no, that we did not violate our own bylaws.
Yes. Yeah, so on this, a no vote indicates you want the vote as done. Mark Lowy is seated. If you vote yes, we would then have the election violated and there would be no directors until such time as we went through the process to get them. As I say, it's a little complicated, but a no vote will mean you want the vote as done on January 23rd. All right, any further questions?
Just a point. Can there be a motion made to just appoint
To
on the board?
I do not believe so, and otherwise there are two track directors in that District 1. We now have 2, and 2 is the limit. Yes, 2 is all they are authorized to have. I mean, it does sound like a solution, but it's a solution that I believe would be contrary to our bylaws, which therefore, unless someone has another idea, would not be possible. Right. Any other questions before we go to the vote? We're going to do roll call vote. So,
You think you need a roll call?
I don't know. I think we need a roll call. We're going to do.
Is that exactly what we have to vote on? Can't there be a motion made? I mean, does there have to be a motion?
Well,
I'm just asking. I don't understand.
No,
Doesn't there have to be a motion?
I don't believe so, because we are assessing a protest, and so we're either in agreement with the protest or we're not in agreement with the protest as the board. It's not a motion to do this because they made the protest. Would that be correct, Mr. Bright?
Yes.
Because we are the last place to resolve this. So, you know, if someone made a motion and it didn't get a second, now we haven't made any progress. All right, we will do a roll call. And again, a no vote is to let the...
Did we violate the bylaws or not?
Did we violate the bylaws, is the question. Go.
Mr. Antonacci, then Mr. Ader. No. Mr. Beagle. Abstain. What'd you say?
Abstain.
Mr. Biddle, Mr. Bays, Mr. Brandt, Mr. Brennan. No. Mrs. Bertera. No. Mr. Brown. No. Mrs. Cahill. Mr. Crawford. No. Mr. Cross. No. Mr. Descharmes. No. Mr. Feraldo. No. Mr. Ford. No. Mr. Gautario. Yes. Mr. Gillock. No. Mr. Gregory. No. Mr. Hawes. No. Mr. Hoovler. Abstain. Mrs. Ingracia. Mr. Johnston. Mr. Kane. No. Mr. Kenny. Mr. Kimmelman. No. Mr. Landis. Mr. Levitt. Mr. Lilly. Mr. Lowy. Mr. McKinnon. No. Mr. Marine? Mr. Marshall? Mr. McCoy? Mr. McErleen? Dr. Moffett? Dr. Mossberger? Mr. Nichols? Mr. Olford? Mr. O'Toole? Mr. Piney? Mr. Panaccio? Dr. Powers? Mr. Revington? Mr. Reynolds? Mr. Rowland? Mr. Rooney? Mr. Salvi? Mr. Schick? Mr. Snicker? Mr. Settlemore? Mr. Stratton? Mr. Sweeney? Mr. Tubin? Dr. Walker? Mr. Wand? Mr. Wiles? Mr. Yan? Vice Chairman, Mr. Williams? Chairman, Mr. Axelrod?
No.
And President, Mr. Langley.
Yes.
Okay. I count 38. Let me count them again.
Count them again. Count them again.
6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
One of these years, you'll all have something in front of you, and you'll just push a button.
2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8,
I know. Now they have in some legislatures, somebody comes and pushes the button for them. I don't know that to be true, but I've heard.
I got 38.
38.
noes.
38 noes. Okay, how many yeses?
2. 3. 6, 7. I count 7.
And I said.
And the number of abstains.
And how many abstains?
No, 7 sustained. 7 sustained.
No, abstain.
1. 2. Got 3 yeses.
So,
Okay, 33 yeses, 7 abstains,
7, yeah.
7. 38, 3, 38 noes, 3 yeses, 7 abstains.
so we have 38 noes, 3 yeses, and 7 abstains. I think the,
48. That's right,
okay.
48.
Then the election is valid, and Mr. Lowy is the confirmed new track director. District 1, thank you. Mr. Hoovler.
I would like to make a motion that President Langley create a committee to study this situation and to address specifically the track election bylaw.
Do I have a second? Mr. Settlemore? Okay, 2 seconds. Mr. Brennan, Mr. Settlemore. All those in favor? Carries. Add number committee 7 to your list, Mr. Langley.
Right.
Okay. Before we move on to the election of officers, which would be quickly, I just want to make a point so I do not forget. It is very likely that tomorrow, as we are approving the budget and other things, that there will be 2 additional votes for the directors to deal with based on the meeting yesterday in marketing and communications having to do with spending, budget spending for television and budget spending for the Conversion social media project. I urge all of you to do your best to be here for that. We start at 9. We'll move quickly, but it's imperative that we have a quorum to handle that work tomorrow morning. All right, now we'll move on to election of officers. I think this is Vice Chairman, Treasurer, and Secretary. There were one person for each of those positions that sent in their request to be considered. So all 4 of them, Barbara Brooks, Richard Brandt, Russell Williams, and myself, have been re-elected for one-year terms beginning at this meeting. Now we can move along to the President's report. President Langley.
All right. We've got several pretty important issues that we're going to tackle over the next few days. I think one issue that's arisen lately, or not so lately, depending on where you were, is one that scared everybody in the racetrack business, purses at tracks with slots for the last few years. Everybody's worried, well, what happens if we lose the revenue from the slots? And basically, one reason that we haven't lost it in most areas is that the laws have been such that the casino operators had to race so many days of harness racing or thoroughbred racing, depending on where they were, and pay such a percentage of purses to keep eligible to have their casino license. And it's been the fear of everyone that somewhere along the line that might disappear. And basically in Florida lately, we've had what we call decoupling legislation. And I'm going to ask Joe Panaccio to come up and explain a little bit of it, and so we'll all understand it. And I neglected just a minute ago, we have several people here that probably should be introduced, but I'm only going to introduce one of them. And that's one of our previous directors, and a wonderful lady who's been in the business for 100 years, not 100, I'm sorry, Martha, but Martha Brown is here today, and I'd just like her to stand up and have us recognize that she made it today. Joe?
Good morning. I'm going to consider that you guys were applauding for me too, so I'm going to take part of that. And thanks for the opportunity, Phil and Mike and Ivan, for the chance to talk to you guys a little bit about Florida. I'm suffering from a cold, so don't think that that what's going on has gotten me that badly yet. But just a quick update. Our legislature is meeting right now. We have 2 weeks left in session. We have a 60-day session in Florida. They're a part-time legislature. There are currently bills in both the House and Senate to decouple horse racing and dog racing and quarter horses. This has taken place due to the fact that they are attempting to get the Seminole tribe to pay $3 billion in tax revenue over the next 7 years. And as part of that, the parimutuel group has been able to convince the legislature that they needed certain concessions if the Seminoles were going to get certain added games to their casino. So this becomes very involved in this very simple effort by the governor to get $3 billion from the Seminole tribe has gotten so much pork hung on it. For those of you that don't spend a lot of time in legislative sessions, you wouldn't understand, but it just hangs so much stuff on it. The bill has gotten very heavy in both the House and the Senate. In the state of Florida, the bill must be heard in several committees in both the House and the Senate before it can go to the floor for a vote. I will tell you that for the first time in the 4 years that I've been going up there, it's always come up to a certain extent, but it has real life this time. The parimutuels have done a great job of putting their position forward to the legislators. And I'm here today, most importantly, to ask you guys for your support. Those of you in this room probably represent somewhere between 75 and 100% of the horsemen in the United States in one form or another. You reach them, you see them, you talk to them. We need your help. We need your help in Florida financially. I had a study done in 2015. The parimutuels alone have donated in excess of $5 million to various legislators who just happen to sit on these various committees. We at the FSBOA have donated $4,000. So I don't know if you think their $5 million gets them more power than our $4,000, but one could probably reach that conclusion. And now the way the bill was structured, somebody called me and said it looks like the parimutuel guy actually, his lawyer wrote this bill because that's how bad it is. And I want you to just understand the plight of harness racing in Florida if this bill in the House, as written, gets approved. It says that if we decouple and they choose to not race for a 12-month period, excuse me, they could then reapply to not race for an additional 12-month period, or therefore 24 months. If the track was dark for 24 months, the license would then become invalid and could never be renewed again. That's exactly the way it's written. Therefore, killing harness racing forever in Florida. And the reason is very simple. There is only one permit in the state, one harness racing permit. So that means that there will be no harness racing south of Maryland or Kentucky, however you want to, which direction you want to go, in the future if this bill is to pass and go forward. It is the most egregious bill I've ever seen written. How they've been able to develop the votes that they got is amazing, but that's where we're at. The Senate has written an additional bill that changes and has other things in it, which makes it maybe a little bit more difficult. Both houses are going to have to agree on one bill before they can send it back to the governor, who will clearly sign because his motivation is the tax money, and I understand that. I guess my biggest thing is I don't understand why they want to kill us. We've raced for 50-plus years at Pompano. It's been a great marriage, but I think there's a little background that you guys need to understand differently than, as President Langley just stated, that we're protecting the percentage of the slot money that we get, and we want to keep that to keep this business going. We don't get a percentage of the slot money at Pompano Park. We get the crumbs that they throw us. We race for less money today than we did before we had a casino, which is a staggering statement when you think about it. So think about that. We got a casino that's driving probably somewhere in the area of $150 million in slots and another $10 or $15 million in poker, and making their money, and we get what they decide to give us contractually. I often tell my board that when we go in to talk contract with them, my board sends me up there with a gun. Unfortunately, they don't let me have any bullets. And it's been a very difficult time for us. This thing started back in 2003 when we supported, fought, marched, did everything possible to get this law passed in the state of Florida. We were excluded in the beginning, we're still excluded, and now they want to kill us. They don't only want to kill us, they want to push us in the hole and throw the dirt in on top of us. So we're basically here with our hand out to all of you that are in a horseman association, all of you that race horses, the veterinarians, the farriers, the feed guy, whatever. This is going to take money because this is going to be a legal fight now. We believe that their move is clearly unconstitutional under Florida law, that this thing was put in by a constitutional amendment followed by a referendum of the people of Florida, and it's the only way it can be taken out. Of course, their position is that's not the case, that the legislature has the right to change this law, and that's where the legal fight is going to set up, and that's where it'll go. In any event, whether we survive the next 2 weeks and somehow we slip through this, which, by the way, if we do, it won't be because of horse racing. It'll be because of something else that happened that'll stop these bills from being passed, because the parimutuel guys who have banded together as a group have positioned themselves to win this vote on a purely horse-in, horse-out basis. We would have only 2 racetracks racing. After decoupling, it would be Gulfstream Park and Tampa Bay Downs, and that's it. I mean, standardbreds, quarter horses are done if this legislation is upheld. So obviously I could take you through all the other stuff that's happened and you know, all the obvious questions. that everybody would have. And we've made the pitch 10,000 times in Tallahassee about the jobs in the state of Florida, the money, the trickle-down effect, and all those things. And hopefully somebody comes to their senses in Tallahassee in the next 2 weeks. There's a critical vote for us tomorrow in Tax and Finance in the House. I don't think they'll be favorable to us at this point in time. It would be very, very surprising if we survived that vote. There'll be a vote in the Senate on Wednesday. We might have a better shot there. But we're in for a very tough time. And for those of you that want to keep me from having to move back north where it's cold and allow me to stay in Florida and race, we really do need your support. We have some handouts for you. No comments on the quality of my handout, by the way. We had to do it in one day. It's very simple. It just tells you how you can donate and how you can help us out. And lastly, I just wanted to tell you, as an amateur racer and hearing the stat that was given by Ivan on boots, that at my current rate, if I live another 100 years, I'm going to catch up to him in wins, if I carry my current rate. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot, guys.
Don't go away. Thank you, Joe. And at this point in time, on several occasions, we have an emergency fund at the USTA where we've supported amateur racing, we've supported various things. And at this point in time, I want to give Joe a check from the USTA for $10,000 to help defray his legal fees.
Thank you, Frank. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you. How you doing?
Okay.
Hold the check. Oh, we're doing it all. All right. It's like winning the Oscar.
Thank you.
Okay. All right.
What? Okay.
We are up on GoFundMe right now, so if anybody wants to donate, and it's on that sheet, the easy way in is on there. Yes, Doc?
If the bill passes.
Right.
And there's a lawsuit, and it's tied up in the courts, will racing continue like it is?
I'd say the majority of attorneys say yes, that there will be a stay, but there are those that believe that the legislature could override that. But I'm not a lawyer. I don't know for sure. Yeah, Bob?
Is there any chance you guys can get to the place where Gulfstream and Tampa is, that you're excluded from the company?
Well, we've tried that, and my plea to the legislature was, listen, I can understand as on a business basis if Pompano Park doesn't want to race horses. If they own the business and they don't want to race horses anymore, one could get there if you were running that business. But I don't get why they want to kill give me the license, you know? The other part that I find just absolutely laughable, as you know, we share 50-50 with them on simulcast revenue. The way the bill in the House is written, they would kill us and they'd get 100% of simulcast. Insane, but that's just the way it's written right now. But thanks. Thanks, Phil.
Thanks, Joe. That's a problem that all of us worry about. A couple of other things that we're going to consider. I want to update you a little bit on the medication issues. As you know, we have commissioned the Rutgers people, Dr. McKeever and Dr. Malinowski, and also Dr. Malin to be part of it, to study cobalt and see what the actual effects of cobalt are. I mean, we all know now we can measure cobalt. The question is whether the 25 limit, the 50 limit, the 75 limit are correct, and whether it even affects anything. But hopefully by the end of March, the study will be completed and it'll be passed on for peer review, and then we'll all have an idea of what the effects of cobalt really are. I think we all think that it is effective, but we don't know to what extent. So anyway, that will be coming up hopefully the end of March. Usually when they say the end of March, they neglect to say what year, but I think they're going to do it this year. The second item is one that really is kind of scary. As you know, there have been some positive tests reported in the New York area for a drug called glycine. And several trainers have been notified that they have positive tests. We don't know for sure what the New York Commission is going to do. We do know that they developed a test for it, Dr. Malin did, and we know that supposedly some of the results are not good. They're above even what you could consider a contamination trace. But anyway, at the present time, New York, I guess the gaming board is the one that works on it, but in New York, they're studying it, they're investigating it, and they're going to try to make sure that before they suspend anybody or do anything, that they know what they're talking about, which is a good thing. The bad thing will be if they determine when all is said and done that it was intentional treatment of horses and they suspend some people, and then we will have a black eye. But anyway, at the moment, all we can do is sit and hope that New York acts in a responsible manner, which I've been told they're going to do. And that's about all I can say on it. Joe, is there any comment about whether they're going to study it and do the right thing?
Well, like you said,
Thank you. Okay, Joe says that they're going to study it and make sure they're fair to everybody. Okay, that covers medication. The federal legislation, we were supposed to have Travis Tigert here today to explain how he did it. He's the guy that heads the Olympic testing, and he's kind of controversial because a lot of things aren't done quite the way they say they are. Mike and I met with the representatives from the Jockey Club in November, and we told them, we'd be willing to listen. And they said that they'd have Travis here for our meeting, but he canceled the last minute. And we asked if the people from the Jockey Club that had talked to us wanted to come, and they said no. Most of the stuff that they said back in November was that there might be separate rules for different breeds. There might be representation on the board by the harness industry. There were a whole bunch of mights. They might be okay with Lasix. They might be okay with this and that. It wasn't really the kind of meeting that made you want to jump up and say, boy, we'll support federal legislation. And I think for the most part that, except for the Jockey Club, that most people are a little bit leery of having the feds interfere with anything. So that part of and Jay Hickey will, I think, address that probably later today about what'll happen on that. And the other two things that I wanted to bring up that are we've already talked about it. We've talked about conversion. I'm sure that we'll talk about it a little more today, a little more tomorrow, and decide what to do. There's a lot of pros and cons. Personally, I would feel bad if we didn't continue with it at this point. We've come down the road for 2 years, and I know some people think that there haven't been marked results and they haven't shown what they've produced, but I'm not sure what anybody expects in the way of marks at this point in time. I will say that I did a little work on the numbers last night, and $250,000 works out to, for each member, $16 a year, works out to $1.32 a month, or 5 cents a day, actually less than 5 cents a day. And I think that, really we're not spending that much money to try to keep the industry going. But anyway, we'll talk about that at Finance tomorrow. And the other thing that will come up tomorrow, you should have a really good meeting on Finance, Ivan, because we're going to talk about a possible dues increase. We probably need to get some more money. One of the options has been to maybe not do it until 2018, but at least to put it in place this year. There are several options that we've talked about, and that'll be brought up tomorrow. Other than that, we've got 6 committees right now that I've been asked to appoint. Probably by the end of the day tomorrow, there'll be 3 more, which will be a record. Uniform rules, we're going to look at again. Fingerprints, Mark Ford has suggested that we try to get that worked out with the RCI somehow. I know Ed Martin's here today, and I think probably he would welcome some kind of a thing where the fingerprints are either in the files of the RCI or in the files of the USTA, so people didn't have to get them done in every state. And I know that there's also a possibility that the, what do they call the license that everybody fills out? The national license, which in some cases seems to work okay. But anyway, those are things that we're going to study. Next year, I see we're on the agenda for the registration committee that Myron Bell had a request to up the stallion limits to 160 instead of 150, but that came in too late to really be considered this year. That got a start after the fire in Canada where everybody got wiped out, and Myron called and asked if Captain Treacherous book could be increased by 10 and the money donated to the Canadian people. I thought at the time when it came in, I talked to Doc Walker and Mike, and we decided that if everybody wanted to increase it by 1 and give the proceeds, why, that would be something to consider. But anyway, that can't come up now till next year. Let's see what else we got here. Oh, Michelle Crawford made some proposals about, unfortunately, when she put out the press release and the proposal, she talked about saving horses from slaughter. And I think the one thing we don't want to do is talk about saving horses from slaughter. We want to actually give horses a new vocation and let them do something other than be racehorses, but I don't think we ever want to talk about sending them to slaughter if we can afford it. So, and I nicely said that so everybody in the world can hear it on TV. Other than that, why, I think the staff has worked hard all year, and Mike and his group they're down to 50 people basically. The new building is pretty good. The only problem we've had is that whoever did the inspection screwed up a little bit. Hard to believe after a year you'd need new furnace or new furnaces if somebody inspected it the way they should. But anyway, those little things happen. And that's all I've got to say for now, and let's have a good day the rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you, President Langley. Next item on our agenda is a brief overview of the rule change proposals that will be going through the various committees. Bruce Tubin will spend a little bit of time going through those. Bruce?
Thank you, Ivan. The purpose of doing this today is to have everybody have a better understanding of the rules before we discuss them at our individual meetings. So I will briefly go through them and try to explain them to the best of my ability. Proposal number 1 is a proposal from Murray Brown to add a definition of outstanding as used in Rule 2608
adding a new subsection to Rule 4, Racing Terminology and Definition. The current rule states names of outstanding horses may not be used again. However, there is no definition of an outstanding horse. So what Mr. Brown is looking to do is have a definition of an outstanding horse. His idea is names are restricted for further use for any horse that has earned over $250,000 or has a mark of 155 or better. A horse born before 1980 is considered outstanding if it had a mark of 2 minutes or has earned $100,000. This shall also include any stallion or broodmare who has produced an outstanding horse as defined in Rule 2608. So basically here, he's looking for a definition of outstanding. Proposal number 2, submitted by T.C. Lane and Gene Wiley, is a proposal to require all county fair tracks that have charted races to provide the same information as required at extended parimutuel meetings by deleting the words extended parimutuel. The rule right now reads, the charting of races shall be done only by a licensed clerk of the course, charter, and he or she shall be responsible for providing a complete and accurate chart. At all parimutuel meetings, the charting of races is mandatory. This rule is intended to eliminate the at all extended parimutuel meetings, which would include fairs and parimutuels. Proposal number 3 is to add the following new section 19 to existing Rule 6.15B to note on the charted line and racing program when there has been a recall prior to the race. This was submitted by Ray Schnittger, and he states that if a horse races bad, that might be a reason why. In other words, if there is a recall before a race, Ray would like to see that notated in the past performance lines.
Could we clarify that a little bit? Is Ray in the room?
Is Ray here?
He was.
Just walked out.
My question was, and I assume that he wants it marked on every horse in the race, that it was a recall.
Yes, he wanted it marked on every horse, and there was amendments to that request to just be noted on the horse, in particular that raced bad. Proposal number 4 is a proposal to modify Rule 1403B to prohibit a 2-year-old from starting in a race 2 consecutive days by adding the following sentence at the end. Steve Huffman states, 2-year-olds are being raced, then shipped to another track and raced the next day. Some jurisdictions and states do not have rules and regulations to protect the welfare of the 2-year-olds. Mr. Huffman requests that 2-year-olds be prohibited from racing 2 consecutive days. Proposal number 5 is a rule to amend Rule 902B to include the percentage of ownership for each owner when a horse is owned by more than one person by adding the following sentence. In the event the horse is owned by more than one beneficial owner, the percentage of ownership for each beneficial owner shall be listed. The source is Thomas Fiorentino. The source states, have owners declare the percentage of ownership of their horses so that when a purse check is issued on multiple ownership horses, we don't have to wait and worry about receiving our share in a timely manner. Proposal number 6 is a proposal to amend Rule 14 and Rule 11.03 to require the drawing of post positions and selection of the owner when there are multiple claims entered on the same horse be shown on the internet via video. This came from Bill Riepmeyer. The source states, confidence in system, interest in how it works. Proposal number 7, also by Ray Schnittger, a proposal to amend Rule 14.11 by changing the 30-day requirement to read 120 days. The source states, It costs an owner trainer as much as $400 each time they qualify a horse. A bettor knows which trainers have them ready or not. This proposal is supported by every trainer under 60. So Ray, in his own special way, has just insulted 75% of the people that are here today. There have been a record 5 amendments to this particular proposal. I believe most think the proposal is a good idea, just the number of days have been amended. Number 8, a proposal to amend Rule 14.19 to provide for horses who have drawn an outside post position in their previous race to draw for an inside post position. Conversely, a horse that has drawn an inside post position will draw for an outside post position. The source of this is Ken Rumble Jr., and he states that if a horse drew post 1 through 4 in its last 8 starts, it can only draw post 5 through 8 this start. If a horse drew post 5 through 8 in its last start, it can only draw post 1 through 4 in this start. This, Ken Rumble is from District 8, my personal district, and we asked Mr. Rumble to go back to the drawing board and explain how this would work. So we tabled it in our district. Proposal number 9 is a proposal to add a new subsection 18 to Rule 16 to require all half-mile extended mutual tracks to utilize what is commonly known as a slanted starting gate. This proposal is from Richard Kopp. He states, first and foremost, to restore parity to the betting public. Statistics prove that an outside post is a complete detriment to the betting. Also, most drivers just trip a horse if they have an outside post or trainer scratches for lameness. Proposal number 10 is a proposal to amend Rule 1801, submitted by Joe Feraldo, by adding the words "or any foot supports" after the word stirrups in the second sentence. Also submitted as a housekeeping rule by making the same changes to Rule 18.25 dealing with the design of the sulky. The current rule reads, kick the horse, which shall be defined as a blow or thrust with the foot against any part of the horse's body to impel striking with the foot. Removal of a foot from the stirrups, and this is where Mr. Feraldo would add, or any foot support in and of itself shall not constitute the offense of kicking. Proposal number 11, also from Mr. Feraldo, is a proposal to amend Rule 18.08 to delete the words loud shouting or other from the first sentence and delete the entire second sentence. After the starting gate is in motion, both feet must be kept in the stirrups until after the finish of the race, except that a driver shall be allowed to remove a foot from the stirrups temporarily for the purpose of pulling earplugs. That's what the current rule is. Mr. Feraldo would like that Section 1808 to say improper conduct. Improper conduct is forbidden in a race, thereby eliminating loud shouting and eliminating feet in the stirrups. His rationale is Rule 18.08 regarding loud shouting and removal of a foot from the stirrups. The same is very often necessary to urge a horse and is done quite often. It is also most essential when a horse makes a break to alert fellow participants of danger. Regarding removal of one or both feet from the stirrups, drivers are not kicking horses when their feet are merely out of the stirrups. Many drivers almost always have their feet out of the stirrups or whatever the foot support is on these newer bikes at the conclusion of a race. That is not kicking and is in plain and open view of the officials who do not view, nor should they view it, as a kicking violation unless it meets the criteria set forth in Section 18.01. Those officials are indeed correct in not calling the mere removal of a foot a kicking violation. However, there seems to be some conflict in the various USDA rules currently in place. Hopefully, these proposals will remove any conflict and confusion and not add to the same. Rule Proposal 1808, submitted by Ivan Axelrod, Phil Langley, and Alan Levitt, is also regards Rule 1808, improper conduct, foot out of stirrup. Their proposal is to delete the existing language in 18.01L and replace it with the following: loud shouting or other improper conduct is forbidden in a race. Then retitle existing Rule 18.08 and amend the language to read as follows: foot out of stirrup, kicking a horse. The existing Rule 1801L is being deleted, and a new Rule 1808 to address the inconsistencies in the interpretation of both of the existing rules dealing with the driver's responsibility to keep their foot in the stirrups. I believe that means, and Ivan or Phil could help me, that we are eliminating foot out of stirrup, kicking a horse in Rule 1801L and placing it in the existing 1801, replacing it in Rule 1808 to form a rule that addresses loud shouting and kicking in the same rule. Is that correct? Hopefully you know.
Well, I don't want to speak to promoting this. I will just say it would have been great if Mr. Feraldo and us would have spoken to each other before we individually submitted rule changes, because it does cloudy the water, and hopefully the committees and rules will be able to pull this together and come up with an effective rule change.
Okay. And the last proposal is a proposal to adopt a section under Rule 2104 to prohibit a horse scheduled to race on Lasix from being scratched from the race for the reason that the horse was late receiving Lasix. The source states the Lasix, and the source is Joseph Lee. The source states the Lasix window should be extended if there is a delay in the scheduled post time due to an inquiry, inclement weather, or other circumstances that changes the originally scheduled post time of a race. Note, the rule regarding the administration, time, and procedure for the use of Lasix is left up to the individual state racing authorities. Those are our 13 proposals. Most of them are self-explanatory. I hope we all have a better understanding of the ones that aren't. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bruce. We weren't quite sure when we outlined the time frame for this morning how much time it was going to take for the District 1 item, and so we are running a little bit ahead of time. So I thought I would provide a treat for all of you, and we're going to take a break now and reconvene at 10 o'clock. Thank you very much. For those on streaming, we will be back in about 15, 16 minutes. Thank you.
Made yourself most popular.
And then. Would you please take your seats? We're going to reconvene. I would say this microphone's off if I didn't know it was on. And then I'll take that when I do it. Okay.
Thank you. And that's it for me.
All right, one last thank you for taking your seats. Mr. Leary. Thank you. I don't know. I said Mr. Leary and everybody got quiet. Thank you. All right, I'm glad you had a little time to prepare ourselves for the next part of the morning presentation. I do want a couple little things, not little things, but one is please, and I'll do my best to remind you, when using the microphones rather than sitting at your table responding, because when you sit at your table and respond, people on the streaming don't hear you and probably some of the people in the room. So please, if you have a comment, is to use those microphones. The next thing is, before we get into our presentations, David Carr has been an employee of the USDA for many years. I think he was here when I started on the board. He is head of our Information Services Department. He is going to retire, I think finally, because he's threatened for a while to do that at the end of this year. And, oh, end of this year. End of this year is March 31st of next month, right? Okay. You know, David has been so much to so many of you, information, and I hear continually to this day, somebody has something they need, they go to David, and they get it quickly. It's not, I got to follow up in a month, where is it? He's been on top of things just forever. Later this year, he is going to receive an award and an honor in Florida from the Communications Corner, and in July in Goshen will be inducted into that for all of his years of service to the organization. So I just wanted to take a moment to acknowledge him today, because it may be, as a group, the last time we can do that. We hopefully will see him from time to time. But personally, David, I'd like to thank you for everything that you've done for the organization. You've served us very, very well. All right, we're going to move into our presentations, and as Phil mentioned, and on our agenda was Travis Taggart, who could not be here. Last night when we were having dinner across the street, I don't know, there were 8 of us, something like that, and this guy strolls in and just walks around. I don't know who he is. I think David Reed knew who he was, but you know, he introduces himself and he starts talking. I have no idea. And he had just come into Columbus. He said, I've been to Delaware, but God, there's nothing going on in Delaware, but now I'm in Columbus. This is a great place. The restaurants and walking around. And so he was walking around the town there and walked into this restaurant, I don't know, and saw us. And so he spent about 30 minutes there, and I did not know who he was. And he introduced himself to me, and I, sorry to say, really wasn't still quite sure who he was. But he is our lead speaker now, and he's one of Canada's leading drivers for the past decade. We may have a question and answer from you to raise your hand if you know who he is. He's won more than 2,800 races and earned nearly 30 million Canadian dollars. That's interesting. That could be 40 million US dollars, or it could be 20 million US dollars, depending on what decade. He currently operates a 36-horse stable with his wife, Amy, and they created and operate a fractional ownership business out of Canada, and a website. And he's here to talk about that today. He is known by most as AMAC, and his name's Anthony McDonald. Anthony?
Good morning, everybody. My name is Anthony McDonald. I have what I thought was great news for everybody when I came here today. I have a great message. I think it's a message that in a very short time we've proven, my wife and I and the stable and the people that work in it, exactly what a lot of people were wondering. Does fractional ownership really work? And we're by no means the newest or the first fractional ownership site. We're quite the opposite. Syndications have been around forever. But is there investment for us in the general public? Now, before I start my speech, I thought I would speak about what Mr. Panaccio has spoke about. Everybody in here understands the importance that we fight decoupling. This is only a start in Florida. If we allow this to happen, it will run across the board wherever it can in both sides of the border. I was a second trainer in Quebec, and I watched it destroy everybody in Quebec. I am in Ontario, and I've lived in Ontario and raised my family in Ontario throughout the whole ordeal with the government there. And I don't believe a lot of the people can actually understand the grave nature of what is happening in Florida. If this happens, it's over in Florida, and people need to understand the finality of that, the seriousness of that. Over is over, and done is done. Now, we had a horrible tragedy a month and a half ago in Ontario. Classy Lane Stables, one of the fires, one of the barns burnt down in the fire. And we had media coverage for 2 weeks. People had sent messages and condolences from all over the world, really. And when I got here today, I looked. We had raised almost $750,000 for the people involved in the Classy Lane fire, which is a fantastic thing. Now, when I heard Mr. Panaccio talk, I looked on their GoFundMe page, $23,000. It's hard to believe that we're an industry that although we're spread out over a vast area, we all look out for one another. We all want to make sure that everybody gets ahead. But when it comes down to something like this, it's very difficult. The next gentleman on the stage spoke about how conversion is working hard in the industry and how it was 5 cents a day, I believe, for the members of this organization. Ladies and gentlemen, I mean, is it that hard to raise money to fight what's going on in Florida? Is it that hard to pick up the phone or send out emails and say, we really need to do something for the people in Florida, not because it's just for the people in Florida, but because it's us. This will spread, it will grow, and it will go everywhere. If they get away with decoupling casinos and racing in Florida, it's only a short jump to everywhere, not just in the United States, but in Canada. So I urge you, the board of the USTA, to take aggressive action and move now to make sure that we have funding to fight what's going on in Florida. I certainly have no idea if it's too late, but I'm certain the people of Florida do. So anyway, thank you very much. Because when we started this website in August, I knew it was going to be a huge undertaking to begin with. We had to convince people that we could sell pieces of their horses, convince people that if you send us your horses, 2 things would happen. 1, they'd be professionally trained, and 2, you would have an opportunity to get fair market value for your horses, which doesn't often happen at sales. You can go to a sale, your horse is undersold, and then the breeders are hurting to begin with. So obviously, being from Ontario, there is a sense of increased urgency in regard of growing a fan base and on-site customers in my province and in my country. Our new subsidy that we're involved with now with the Ontario government is tied to growing both, and time is always running out. Getting investors and owners has become a daunting task with waning confidence, high American purses, and a weak Canadian dollar. But we are both in the same boats, and we both have the same leaks. Although only one of us is on the clock, so to speak, at all times, we both face the same issues. How do we replace our depleted stock of fans and investors? This is a problem we both face across the board every day. What my wife and I have done is built the stable.ca. It is now proven to alleviate both issues on a smaller level because it's only one stable. Obviously on a smaller scale, but there would be no reason to believe that 50 of these sites could not do the same thing 50 times over. Bridging the gap between horse racing and the general public is a must. And if done the right way, will be a tremendous aid in rectifying the massive problems we all face. This is by no means the first fractional or syndication group or site, but by far the most unique. The Stable.ca is, simply put, the easiest way for an owner to get involved with horse racing. We offer our clients the option to buy as little as 1% of a horse. That sounds odd, but imagine how many people would love to be an owner if they could simply afford it. Couple that with flat rate billing, and what you really have, you can't make it any more simple than that. We've attracted owners from literally all over the world, expelling the myth that our industry in one form or another is in a downward spiral. What we are, though, is in a coma. We lack vision, or at least the intestinal fortitude, to embrace it and run with it. Horsemen expect racetracks to magically bring in fans and gamblers to their facilities, while tracks expect horsemen to extract investment from a depleted pool of owners. Neither have done a great job growing our fan base for the most part. Our site idea was born from my time I spent in politics. After talking to people at the door in Guelph, I was to possibly represent 125,000 people in my area. I would knock on the doors. We visited maybe 30,000 homes or whatnot. And the vast majority of people, when you're done talking about the politics and whatnot, they were upset with what the government did. They understood the hard work that the people of this industry endure. I would always thank them. Before I left their door, I would say, have you ever owned a horse? No, geez, I've never owned a horse. I do love horses. Well, have you ever been to a racetrack? No, sir. No, never been to a racetrack. I said, well, that's odd, because there's two of them within 15 minutes of where we're standing right now. I was in Guelph, 15 minutes from Mohawk and 15 minutes from Grand River Raceway. And the people that I was talking to at their door professed their love for horses, loved horse racing, were upset with what the government did, and have never, ever been to a horse race. It was at that point that the original idea for the Stable.ca was born. What this website represents is the direction our industry needs to be going in, focusing on simplicity in horse ownership, building a clientele and fan base geared around customer service. The equation for success is easy for our website and can be for the entire industry. Our industry simply needs a grassroots movement. You need to build your fan base one person at a time. We need only to take it one step further and cultivate new owners into our next generation of customers and gamblers. You may think this is a far-fetched idea, but I've seen how many people come out to watch these horses jog and train every Saturday morning. 20, 30 people on the corner of the racetrack watching horses go. They have no idea how fast they're going or what they're doing, but they're really, truly enthused by what they're seeing. Now, how many people of these very same people would bring more people to the farm, to the track, at the night at the races? For every one person that buys a percentage of a horse, we usually see 5, 6, 7 people show up at the farm. Those 5, 6, 7 people are going to show up at the track. They're going to buy beer. They're going to buy chicken wings. They're going to wager. They're going to wager at the racetracks. I propose that these people will make up a significant portion of the next generation of gamblers in our sport. The best kind, I might add. As I said, on-site gamblers. This has always been the best customer for us to have. The more fractional stables that are opened up in North America, the more we can grow our overall fan base, grow our own sites and our customers, and this will directly result in more revenue streams that we haven't seen for decades. As we grow our fan base, we grow our online base. We grow our TV presence, taking horse racing where it hasn't been in a very long time, and that's mainstream. Now, maybe not NFL or MLB, but for the love of God, better than darts and bowling. Rather than looking for our big bettors, our next big bettors, to be led back to the sport or some new form of gambling on horse racing that will save us all in one foul swoop, why not get back to basics and begin growing this industry one fan at a time? We as horsemen need to advertise and market ourselves in a better way, because the stable has already proven there is investment out there, everywhere. But we need to be aggressive in doing this. From an institutional level, we have to pull our own weight also. We have to take down the walls and barriers of steep prices of fractional ownership. We need to look at threshold licensing to help people say yes to ownership and not give them any reason to say no. From where I sit, you can either help grow our industry and be a big part of the solution, or continue to be complacent and be part of the reason that we are where we are. I don't care if you live in Ontario, Pennsylvania, New York, New Jersey, or yes, right here in Ohio. I propose an aggressive campaign to reach out and connect with our existing clientele and locate our future clientele through gambling and analytics that the tracks already have. Educate our horsemen, young and old, help them open their stables to the general public, seek out investment, and capitalize on the dormant interest this industry has. We simply need to secure our rightful place in the gaming and entertainment marketplace that we used to have. We should all move forward, even if it is 1% at a time. Thank you very much.
We do have some questions. Okay. We have any questions on Anthony's presentation? Mr. Hoovler.
Just out of curiosity, has there been any software developed to manage fractional?
That's me.
Anybody?
You're asking me?
Anybody?
I haven't. No.
Anybody?
So
that's the biggest problem, I think, is managing.
You mean at an institutional level or from a personal, private level?
If you create a fractional stable,
yep,
you got to manage the thing.
Absolutely.
And I'm just asking if there is software developed someplace out there or are we in the process of trying to develop that?
You might remember a couple of years ago, we had a developmental deal in place with Joel Benson's company for a product called Stable Tracker. There were interfaces within that platform that would have allowed for that. So I think my answer would be yes, it exists. I don't know if it exists in perfect form, but I don't think it would be too difficult to achieve.
I mean, from the other side of that also, I mean, when you're dealing with this strong amount of people, I mean, yes, the gentleman Justin Van Dale that built the site, but it comes down to customer service also. Before I walked in here, I answered 6 emails to people that were asking about horses. You know, when people look on my website and look on the cards that you'll be given, that's my cell phone number on there, my personal email on there, and I answer everybody in a timely fashion. And you really have to. I mean, this industry is unique in the fact that we have horses. You know, this is an investment you can watch. It's right in front of you. It's tangible. But at the same time, it's no more unique than any business. You know, how would Michelob look if they didn't advertise? How would Coca-Cola look? I mean, the advertisement, the business structure of this industry is by far not unique. This is simple business. Customer service will keep these people coming back.
Yes, my question is, how many jurisdictions do you race in, and how easy or difficult has it been for you to handle the licensing for all the members of your fractional stable?
So I was really hoping somebody would ask me that. A lot of people in here don't know who I am. I drove 6.5 hours last night to come down here and speak for potentially 15 minutes with potentially no questions or no interest in what I was saying. I'm going to get in my car in an hour and drive 6 hours back to Ontario because I am going to race tonight at Flamborough Downs. So I came here because I was not happy with the level of interest and the level of execution from Canada in regards to fractional ownership. To be very clear, it's much different down here. In Ontario, we have Standard Break Canada, represents Canada, right? Ontario is the giant racing conglomerate. The other places are much smaller, right? So there are walls, much like you'll have state walls to go through in regards to fractional ownership, but they're a lot softer in Ontario. So I wanted to put in place what I would call a threshold ownership, which would mean you would own X amount of percent. If you own combined or cumulatively less than X amount of percent, you would be considered a fractional owner. You would pay a fractional ownership fee, which would hopefully be in the $30 range, in Canada anyway. And this would allow you, 1, to be able to afford your license, and 2, to make it easy for these people to be recognized. There's a rule in place in Ontario, and there probably is one here, where if you own less than 5%, you don't have to be licensed. These people want to become involved. They want to have something tangible in their hands, something that they can say, yes, I'm a member of horse racing. I have 3% of a horse at the stable.ca or Ben Wallace's stable or Ron Burke's or whoever's stable, Mark Ford's stable. But at the end of the day, if we don't make it easy for these people to get involved, they simply won't. We can't afford to turn one human being away from this industry. And if you do that, you're complacent, and you're in the exact same position that we are in right now, and you're helping the problem. You're not helping the solution. That's from where I sit. Years old. I had a guy from Belgium email me 2 days ago. He just happened to see the article that we had in the Toronto Sun and the advertising that we did on Facebook and online, and thought it would be a really neat idea. Obviously, when people call up, they don't really grasp. They think there's a hidden cost, much like when you go to buy a car. It would be great if it would cost what it says it is on the car, but rarely it does. So when we tell you you can buy 1%, no strings attached, I mean you can buy 1%, no strings attached. So for me, it's everywhere. We have 2 groups of owners in England, Northern England. We have people in Florida, Missouri, all over the states. Every state that's represented here probably has an owner of the stable in it. And when we do come to New York to race, yeah, there's going to be licensing problems. We're going to have to stay on top of that when we come to Pennsylvania, we come to New Jersey, wherever. But at the end of the day, if we don't work towards making it easier for these people to get involved, they simply won't. They won't. And that's what it comes to. And this, as I said, it goes back to the business model. Where I come from, it used to be you might see a movie theater in the middle of nowhere, and that's where people went to watch movies. They don't build them like that anymore. Look at where you're sitting. Walk out the door, 15 restaurants, shops, whatever you need is right here around us. What do we have at racetracks? Well, raccoons? There's nothing around us, nothing. We have to have a reason for these people to want to come. We need them to come to our racetracks. We need them to stay. We need them to eat, drink beer, and yes, we need them to gamble. And that's how we are going to build the next generation of gamblers in this industry, one person at a time. And if I'm telling you that for every 1%, 2%, 3% that is purchased, 5 people come with that, or an infinite amount of fans, family, or gamblers, isn't that something we should be doing? Yes, sir.
3 years ago, Frankie Antonacci Jr. had a great idea, and he had, I don't know, 300 or 400 people put in $500.
Yep.
Never had to pay expenses or anything else. And unfortunately, it got great reviews for about a year.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, the horses he had, and he only had like 2 for the group, didn't make it, either one. So that ended up dropping the people out.
Mm-hmm.
How many horses do you comfortably feel that you should have in partnership?
Well, I'll tell you what, just to put it in perspective for everybody, we started this site in August. So there's enough breeders and people that know enough about this industry in this room to understand what that means. We implemented an unproven website to people that probably didn't know me or my wife 1 month before all the major sales started. We left in 2015 and had 24 horses to train at Bay Cairn Training Center in Ontario. We have a horse for Tom Grossman at Blue Chip Farms. Jeff Grell owns a couple of horses in our stable with myself, and we have people that own them from all over the world, as I said. Next year we will have 70. When people realize that this site and sites like this are a viable way not only to get fair market prices for your horses, but to get people invested in this industry, how could you possibly not want to have more sites like this? This isn't about the stable.ca. This is about education for horsemen, so that they understand that there is investment out there. I can't speak for many of the trainers in the United States of America, but I see the trainers that I grew up with in Ontario, and many of them across Canada, that feel, we're in big trouble. We do not have the investment we used to, and we have no idea how to get it. The fact of the...
If you see me working on my phone during the next speaker, I'm buying shares. But I think the comment, and let me give it to you, and for those watching on the internet, the website is thestable.ca, thestable, all one word, .ca. I urge you to look at it. I have not seen it as yet. For those online, go look at that. See what's out there. This certainly looks like, again, another opportunity for us to attack new ownership in different ways. We all would like to get, the person with $20 million who wants to buy 30 horses and be a big shot. But the long-term success, as I'm listening to Anthony, is getting people involved, getting them to the racetrack, getting them to the farms. I truly appreciate your time, Anthony. It was a pleasure meeting you last night and listening to you today. As we move forward, our next speaker, and I have this, bio of James Hickey Jr. Jay has been here many times. He represents the American Horse Council, president of the American Horse Council for the last 20 years. Is our man on the ground in Washington. You've heard him before, and I bring him up today to give us an update on what's going on in our nation's capital.
Give me the biography so I can
Thank you, guys. Thank you very much. It's always a pleasure. I've got a cold, too. I apologize. If it's February, March, it's time to be in Columbus. And I want to thank all of you for inviting me back to speak again, and for all the support that everybody provides to the American Horse Council now and over the last many years. What can you say about Washington and Congress and the election? I would just warn Ivan and Mike that if I start to sweat and it goes all over the place, can I take a break and go back and get my trowel and put my makeup back on? Aren't you watching Trump and Rubio, for goodness sakes? It's gotten to a new low, I think. We're talking about cosmetics now in the presidential campaign. But there was a period in late November and December, the end of the first session last year, where it actually came together. There was some bipartisan activity. And what Republicans, Democrats, White House were able to do is they raised the debt limit through March 2017. So Congress doesn't have to fight about raising the debt limit until after the president is out of office, and March 2017. They also passed an omnibus spending bill that had 4 or 5 very good tax provisions in it and some other things. So there was a slight thaw, and they were able to get that done, like they used to do for 200 years, for goodness sakes. But we're now in an election year. That's going to cause problems. And I think the issue with replacing Justice Scalia on the Supreme Court, and whether the president nominates someone, whether the Senate will take it up, even have a hearing, is going to cause huge issues. And this is just my opinion, it's just going to shut down at least the Senate for the remainder of the year. Because if the Republican Senate won't even have hearings and consider it, and then they've got enough votes to vote against it, the Democrats are going to say, okay, fine, you don't do that, we're not doing anything else. So I think it's going to be very difficult this year to get anything passed, even things that might be necessary. But we did have that short thaw, and there were some tax changes and a couple other changes that were enacted into law. And it's important to think about this because all these tax changes, which return or reinstate or extend certain write-offs that the horse industry is eligible for, were retroactive to January 1, 2015. It would have been better if they passed that on January 2, 2015, so people would know last year what they could do. But at least they're retroactive. So if you haven't filed your tax returns, and I suspect most people haven't, consider this. First, they raised the Section 179 expense deduction back up to $500,000. It had expired and gone down to $25,000. So you can write off in 2015, and they made it permanent, and going forward, any purchases of assets you use in your horse business up to $500,000 in the year that you purchase it and place it in service. That's a heck of a tax advantage. That covers almost all horses. I don't know what the percent is, but that's quite a high percentage. They restored bonus depreciation to 50%
It had expired completely. Again, when you purchase a horse, a fence, a car, or whatever, you can, if you get over $500,000, you can still take 50% off there. And they restored the ability to depreciate racehorses over 3 years. That had expired completely. That's good for the next 2 years, 2015, 2016. That's how Congress defines the next 2 years, retroactive plus 2016. So keep those provisions in your mind. Make sure your accountant knows about them when you go to file your tax return. They're very, very good provisions. Another thing which doesn't affect you directly, but we were able to get into the omnibus bill, which was passed at the end of the year, into the 5-year highway bill, the reauthorization of $85 million for the recreational trail program. That doesn't apply to you, but the Horse Council has been fighting that. $85 million in the recreational trails program, a lot of it is used, or a percentage used for recreational riding, and it's very important. We've been fighting because they never passed a highway bill. They just kept passing continuing resolutions. We're off that. It's in there for the next 5 years. It's great. There was an immigration change. That's the good news. The bad news is that it was not comprehensive immigration change. We need comprehensive immigration changes. We need a way to have our undocumented workers documented in some fashion, and whether it leads to permanent status, whether it leads to citizenship, whether it just leads to a way that people who have been working in our industry, some for 10 and 15 years, are covered and can stay in the country. We also need H-2A relief for workers on our farm, foreign workers on our farms and ranches, and H-2B for those who work for trainers. The H-2B, there was a minor victory in the sense that there's a cap of 66,000 H-2B workers each year. The law now is that anybody who got an H-2B is not counted against that cap going forward. So if somebody has an H-2B, they can get it the next year, and they're not under the cap. So that's good. The bill took away from the Department of Labor the screwy way that they figure out the minimum wage that you have to pay, and based it upon some actual statistical information. And they define seasonal labor as 10 months. So those are 3 small provisions. We'll take the crumbs that we can get, but we still need comprehensive, and it's going to be, well, you hear that debate all the time on the campaign trail, at least in the Republican candidates. Very difficult to pass. The legislation that is probably the most important to the racing industry right now is the legislation dealing with medication and racing, and the federal authorities taking over that activities. There's 3 bills that have been introduced. The primary bill is called the Thoroughbred Horse Racing Integrity Act of 2015. That's the bill that is supported by segments of the thoroughbred industry, Water, Hay, Oats Alliance, the Jockey Club, and opposed by others in the racing industry. It only applies to thoroughbred racing, not standardbred, not quarter horse, not paints to the extent that they race. It's caused some debate back and forth about that. But what it would do is it would authorize the U.S. Anti-Doping Agency, the agency that Travis Tygart operates, to set up a thoroughbred horse racing authority to write regulations, write procedures, and to actually regulate the thoroughbred racing industry when it comes to medications, drugs on race day or whenever. The Thoroughbred Horse Racing Authority, called FADA, would include 11 people, which would be the CEO of USADA, 5 members of the board of USADA, and 5 people from the thoroughbred industry. And the discretion is totally with the U.S. Anti-Doping Agency as to who goes on that board. It would give them complete authority over the regulating the use of drugs and medication. In order to, it doesn't technically change the Interstate Horse Racing Act, but in order to race in a race that is subject to the Interstate Horse Racing Act, which is just about every one. There aren't too many that aren't. Anybody involved with the horse in that race, the owner, the vet, the trainer, the jockey, the grooms, whoever it would be, has to consent to the authority of the thoroughbred authority. So it doesn't technically change the Interstate Horse Racing Act, but it does certainly require that everybody submit to it. If you didn't, then you couldn't simulcast that race. You couldn't use it on internet gambling. You couldn't do common pool wagering. So it's pretty draconian if you don't agree to it. The effective date is January 1, 2017. Obviously, that's out the window. Funding would be paid by the thoroughbred industry. It doesn't say how. It doesn't define it exactly how it would be done. The American Horse Council has no position on that bill. Until there's a consensus on the bill, or any bill, until there's a consensus, the AHC is not going to take a position one way or another. And I don't really see a consensus coming around in the foreseeable future. The Horse Racing Integrity and Safety Act is the second bill. That's the one that Mr. Pitts and Senator Udall have introduced over the last couple Congresses. That bill would give USADA the direct authority to regulate all racing and would prohibit any race day medication. It would allow it for 2 years, and then you couldn't do it. And it prohibits any horse from racing on medication. The first bill doesn't prohibit anything, but it gives the Thoroughbred Horse Racing Authority the ability to write the regulations. Again, it gives the USADA the authority to run racing at the federal level. And the last is a bill that would simply repeal the Interstate Horse Racing Act. It's just a spiteful bill that Mr. Pitts and Mr. Udall introduced, and all it would do would be repeal the Interstate Horse Racing Act. And they say, well, since you haven't, they say, cleaned up your house, since you've still got some problems in the industry, we're going to repeal the Interstate Horse Racing Act, and you better fix things correct. Obviously, we oppose that. So those are the three bills, and none of them, I think there's very little likelihood that any action is going to be taken. It's very difficult to pass any legislation involving any industry unless the industry coalesces around it, and we don't have that right now. So I think those bills are there but not going to occur. Gaming and internet legislation, and I thought this was going to be a fairly active Congress on internet legislation and sports betting. There's been several bills introduced with internet gaming. Right now, the Unlawful Internet Gambling Enforcement Act, UGIA, prohibits internet gambling unless certain things, unlawful internet gambling. Racing is defined out of unlawful internet gambling, so we can still do internet gambling. In fact, racing is the only activity that can legally do interstate betting on sports, and that is a benefit. But there's been a bill introduced, Congressman Barton, which would license and regulate internet poker. That's the only one that's been introduced. We're watching it to be sure that it doesn't encroach upon our activities. All of these internet bills and then the sports betting bills, which I'll mention, exclude racing if the activity is pursuant to the Interstate Horse Racing Act. So we've been able to, because of the Interstate Horse Racing Act and then because of the change in 2002, we've been able to bootstrap that to be excluded from all the internet bills and all the sports betting bills, and we can continue. And we just, the American Horse Council and the industry just has to make sure that nothing happens that takes out that exemption for horse racing under the Interstate Horse Racing Act. Sports betting, New Jersey has been trying to get sports betting legalized. They've been to courts up and down, 3 or 4 times. Right now, the Professional and Amateur Sports Protection Act prohibits betting on sports except in 3 states, Nevada, Delaware, and Oregon. Delaware and Oregon is not really sports betting like you have, for example, in the casinos. And there's been a couple bills introduced to exclude New Jersey And a fellow named Frank Lobiondo from New Jersey has a bill that would allow any state to legalize sports betting in the next 4 years if it were passed. I don't think any of these bills, again, are going to be passed. Not only is there's no consensus there, the casinos don't agree on what to do. The lotteries don't agree with, the Native Americans don't have a position that would allow passage of this bill. And the thing that's interesting is the sports leagues are now at a bit of loggerheads as to what they think. The NBA is looking to embrace sports betting. The NFL and NCAA are still opposed to it. So again, there's no consensus. It's not likely to pass. But the main focus of racing on all of this legislation is to be sure that whatever moves, whatever happens, and right now all of those bills have exclusions for racing activities pursuant to the Interstate Horse Racing Act. So that's a real benefit. Welfare legislation, I think it was mentioned earlier. In the omnibus bill that was passed, the so-called defunding provision, which appropriated USDA money, but says no part of this money can be used in the process of inspecting horses at slaughter plants. That is in part of the omnibus bill through September 30, 2016, through this fiscal year. Now, there's no plants open. I can't imagine anybody willing to invest, unless it was a boutique type thing, in a slaughter plant involving horses because of this overhanging question about whether you can even do it. So the standalone bill is not going to pass, but it's likely that every time USDA comes up, USDA appropriations comes up, there's going to be this provision added. In the regulatory area, there's a couple of things going on. First of all, with the Department of Agriculture, there's probably going to be a change over the next couple years. It's not going to be this year or tomorrow or whatever. In the federal EIA rules, there's a real problem with equine infectious anemia in the Southwest, in underground tracks, in unsanctioned racing, and people bringing horses over the border. And USDA and the state vets and the American Horse Council is concerned that some of those horses could start moving. So EIA is probably going to be considered. There is a provision called high performance, high health. There's been an attempt by the show industry to get their top horses, the Olympic type horses, Pan Am Games type horses, to be able to move from country to country with some of the lesser import-export restrictions. And that would apply, and we have to make sure that it would apply to certain high-level horse racing too. The Breeders' Cup, the Kentucky Derby, the Hamiltonian, things like that. And that is continuing to move along. China has gotten, I don't know whether you guys are trying to sell horses to China, but a lot of organizations, the Quarter Horse Association, the Arabian Horse Association, are trying to sell horses to China. And much like Japan, it's very hard to get China to allow horses to be imported into China without some serious restrictions. USDA is working on trying to change that with the Chinese government. And hopefully in the next couple years, it will be easier to sell our horses to China because they are very interested in buying them, particularly quarter horse paints because everybody wants to be a cowboy in China, apparently. A couple other things I just want to mention, and the Unwanted Horse Coalition is continuing, and thank you for being a member of that. Our Operation Gelding is still working, and we're starting, we've been without an employee, we just hired someone to do that. We're going to start emphasizing the idea of gelding horses. Now, you're going to have to, like dogs and cats, you're going to have to geld a lot of horses to have a big effect, but at the same time, let's start it. Not every horse has to be bred. There's nothing wrong with gelding, not Russell Williams horses, of course, but backyard horses and stuff like that. So that's part of what the Unwanted Horse Coalition is getting involved in. The movement of horses is unbelievably important. Just think, every time there's a disease outbreak, there's at least a local restriction and a state restriction imposed upon the movement of horses. That can quickly go to a national restriction and an international restriction. EHV1 in New Mexico, Arizona, now Texas and California. Movement restriction is one of our worst nightmares. And the American Horse Council, the American Association of Equine Practitioners, federal and state authorities have set up what we call our Equine Disease Communication Center. And I don't know whether anybody's aware of it. I hope. It's the EDCC. If you look, put in Equine Disease Communication Center on the web, and you can get up-to-date, accurate information about various diseases around the country. When the cutting horse problem in Ogden, in Wellington, in the last couple of years, shows were being shut down across the country. So the EDCC is very important for up-to-date, accurate information that everybody can use. Now, we would appreciate, we've got money for the EDCC now for 2 years, but we need more money. It's a tax-deductible gift to the AAEP Foundation, 501c3 organization. If anybody wants to contribute $25, $250, $5,000, but no contribution is too small. We just want to make sure that that keeps going, and we're trying to get organizations to support it too. How are we doing?
Getting close. Need to be close.
Getting time-wise?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, the last thing I want to mention has little to do with you, but I want to, the American Horse Council has a marketing alliance that involves 20 big companies, big organizations to sell the horse experience to newcomers. We're not trying to sell it to ourselves. I mean, so many efforts have been started over the last 15, 20 years, and not even continued, to try to, and we just market to ourselves. And much like the gentleman that was just here, there's only a limited number of our. The American Horse Council's marketing alliance called Time to Ride is starting its 3rd year. We have a $100,000 challenge where people can sign up, and whoever brings in the most newcomers to their activity, and you can do it too, is eligible for prizes up to $10,000 each. So we're starting our program in 2016. It's been very helpful. It's been unique because it's been very Catholic, small c. It's not promoting quarter horses. It's not promoting thoroughbreds. It's promoting a horse experience. And just if you have a second, look up Time to Ride. It's really, the thing that I like about it and the people who participate the most is it's an optimistic, upbeat type program. People are thrilled that someone is trying to bring more newcomers in. So again, Time to Ride, Marketing Alliance, take a look at that. I'd be happy to answer any questions later, and particularly if you have any tax questions. But watch the taxes. That's the most important thing I think I've said this morning, other than hello and now goodbye. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jay, and Jay will be here certainly through lunch and probably this afternoon as well. Moving on to our next speaker, and Ed Martin has been here previously. All of you know Ed, the CEO and president of ARCI International. He's been here before. I will not give you all his credentials as we know him very well, and so Ed, please.
Good. Good.
Thank you.
First, I'd like to thank Jay. You had a lot of stuff to tell. Ivan was a little scared earlier that with all the time to kill, we wouldn't be able to fill it. So Ivan said, "You got to keep talking, Ed." And he just told me, "You better not talk too much, Ed." First of all, I have to tell you that on my way to Columbus yesterday, my Irish and very Catholic wife said to me, "Where are you going?" I says, "Well, I'm going to the Sunday morning meeting of the U.S. Trotting Association." She says, "You're not coming to church with me? It's the 3rd Sunday of Lent." I says, "No, I mean, I'm going to go to the USTA meeting." So as I'm leaving the house, jokingly, she turns to me, she goes, "You're going to burn in hell." And as I look around the room, because I'm here, I'm going to burn in hell, I'm going to be with a lot of good friends for a long period of time. I don't know how to tell her that the RCI board meeting coming up is on Good Friday, but I'm just not going to go there. The problem coming to these meetings is you hear things and you want to get into them. And one of the things that came up earlier, it had to do with fingerprinting and licensing. There is a mechanism where you can only get fingerprinted once. Unfortunately, not all the states are part of it, and that's the National Racing Compact. And it does cover trainers as well as owners. And it's not something that's just thoroughbred. It's standardbred, quarter horse. It's anybody involved with the ownership and licensure of racing and the training of horses or involved. And that can be expanded to pretty much anybody. If you've got employees you want to take across state lines and so forth, we can help you out with that. It's actually a governmental entity. One of the things I was asked to address had to do with what is RCI doing this year. We had a meeting, and I'm sorry that Travis Tigert couldn't be here, because I remember watching so many televised interviews talking about horse racing and what is done to regulate horse racing and to guard against doping and so forth. I would find myself pounding the kitchen table saying, well, that's not true, that's not true, that's not true. And in many respects, what they do in human sport, there's the same thing that we're doing in equine sport. But what has happened, and you just heard Jay outline the different bills, is people who have wanted different things over the years, like uniformity and regulation, getting rid of race day LASIX, they think our labs are inferior, have out of a frustration gone to Washington. Now, I worked for 10 years of my life in Washington, and I will tell you this. The only way you're going to move a federal bill in Washington on those kinds of issues is to go around to members of Congress who really don't pay attention to this sport and tell them how bad it is. And they don't differentiate between thoroughbred and standardbred and quarter horse, even though it might be in the fine print of an early version of some bill. As far as they're concerned, it's horse racing. This sport, be it standardbred racing, thoroughbred racing, quarter horse racing, we're competing in the sports marketplace. You go to any sport website or blog site and read the comments. They hate the referees. Doesn't matter the sport, football, baseball, basketball, they hate the referees. Same thing in horse racing. And by the way, the racing commissions are the referees. You know, sometimes you like them, sometimes you hate them. Depends upon what they did. Do people make mistakes? Yes, sometimes they do. They try to make the best call they can with the information or how they see it. The difference in horse racing, mostly in thoroughbred racing, actually primarily in thoroughbred racing, is you don't have the owners of the teams going on those websites and talking down their sport. In horse racing and parts of thoroughbred racing, it seems that is a penchant. The more nasty they can get, the more comments they get to their comment on some website. How we talk about this sport is essential. So we've got this macro political problem. We locked ourselves in a room in Tucson in December and kind of talked about how do we get past this? How do we make this all go away? This is so unproductive for the thousands of men and women whose livelihood depends on this sport, and it's a great sport. These bills that they're parading around in Washington really don't have a consensus. They weren't attempted to be put together with a consensus. And I'm not sure, I mean, let me just share that ARCI, our members represent the Canadian regulators as well as the US regulators. In Canada, you've got a federal agency, sets the medication rules, does the drug testing. The provincial racing commissions license, adjudicate, investigate, and enforce. In the US, we're set up a little differently. When you look at the drug testing results out of Canada and the drug testing results out of the US, they're really the same. Same percentage are coming back clear, same percentage are coming up with what they call in human sport an adverse analytical finding, which means you crossed a line. Now, whether that was a violation or not, that's what the investigation is supposed to be about. So we're looking at this and we're saying this sport, what's going on, I mean, is the culmination of the day we all picked up USA Today and there was a front page syringe and they were talking about every horse in North America is running on race day under the influence of performance-enhancing drugs. And they're talking about Lasix. That stuff doesn't help this sport. And this sport, and it is should be priority number one for all breeds, to get everybody on the same page about how we talk about this sport. If we have problems, look at how the NFL took care of their domestic abuse problem. They didn't go on TV and start railing against the sport. They came out against domestic abuse and they went after the guys who basically had it, but they didn't keep dwelling on it. This is a hard sport to regulate. There are a lot of moving pieces. And there's a lot of people, the whole constituency says, we ought to emulate what they do in human sport. Well, if you really look at what they do in human sport, shut me off when you're ready. Okay. When you really look at what they do in human sport, they allow therapeutic use exemption. So when they get up and say, we don't want performance-enhancing drugs in horses when they race, well, you know something? This World Anti-Doping Agency code allows human athletes to compete if they have permission under the influence of a performance-enhancing drug that would otherwise be outlawed if they quietly went with a couple of doctor's notes and got permission. And they don't tell anybody about it. And then we learned in boxing that the U.S. Anti-Doping Agency in some cases would actually give a retroactive therapeutic use exemption. That would be like somebody getting a drug positive that was clearly, I don't know, the whole thing is not something that we do in racing. You know, we try to not bring a charge. We don't give you a pass. If we bring a charge, we don't give you a pass. And you feel you're wrong, you hire a good lawyer and you come in and you argue it and maybe you win. So we're going to have a series of town hall meetings. Now, they're really more like focus groups because we believe at the ARCI, and based upon many conversations that a number of us have had with people like Ivan and Phil and some of you in the audience and people in a number of other organizations across this horse racing sport, that there are some common problems that maybe we need to figure a way to address. And the only way you're going to solve a problem in this sport is if you get a general consensus of how to do it or what the path is. So this is a very deliberate, fairly scientific way we're doing it. We're taking input, we're doing town meetings. They're really more like focus groups where if Mike says, hey, this is the biggest problem. I said, okay. Here's the things that have been suggested to solve that problem. Tell me what's right or wrong with each one of them and which one could you live with. And we're going to do that with a lot of different things. And I would hope that when we're planning a standardbred one in Ohio, we're planning one at the Meadowlands. It's probably going to be more. They're going to be standardbred only. Though some of them are open, some of them are closed. Our goal is to get people to speak frankly. And for those people who don't participate in one of those sessions, we're going to probably in the next couple of weeks put on our website, and we're going to ask you to circulate it to your members or put it on your website, and we hope that everybody in this room takes 5 minutes to go through that survey and tell us what you think. And we rate things, you know, and depending on how you answer a question, then that determines whether you get question A or question B as a follow-up. And what we're going to do is we're going to take all that information at the end of the year. We hope to analyze it and see what problems we absolutely need to address and how people are willing to come together to make it happen. So we're going to have, call it what you want, some kind of, we called it a racing congress in our press release, but it's really going to be a group that hopefully we will lock ourselves in a room all day. We'll bring in food, and we won't come out until we have an agreed upon course of action. And we all can agree that nobody's going to continue to start lobbying and talking publicly and talking down these great sports, because that has to stop. We have a number of other competitive challenges to deal with. We shouldn't be hurting ourselves. Last thing I'd like to say is we have a model rules process, and it's parallel to your rules making process, and we rely a lot on what you do here. I would encourage you. We've taken to putting proposed model rules on our website and asking people to electronically submit comments. We realize we have a convention coming up in New Orleans in a couple of weeks. I know Phil's going to be there. I know Mike's going to be there. I don't think there's a whole lot of people in the audience that are planning to be there. But your voice comes through Phil and Mike, but your voice directly is also important too. And we've got a model rule up there dealing with medical labeling requirements for compounded substances and for prescriptions that come in from out of state. It's worth taking a look at or having your vet look at it and ask them to comment on it. Your voice is very important. And lastly, I'd like to thank the USTA for the fine work you do on so many aspects of our sport. And I also want to say how appreciative we are for your involvement with the ARCI. Your counsel is always very valued and carries an awful lot of weight with us. Anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you, Ed. Thank you very much. Thank you, Ed. It's good annually and more often at times getting input from you on what is happening in our industry, our racing industry. We have one more speaker before we're going to break. Once that is done, we will break for a quick picture, which will be 2 doors over, which I'll mention at that point, and then lunch. Our last speaker is Rob Key. Again, I have a lengthy intro. We have spoken, and Rob has spoken to us many times, yesterday included, and today he's, I think, going to summarize some of the things discussed yesterday in his conversations with many of you. Rob?
Well, thanks, everyone. Good to be here. The year seemed to go by pretty quickly. I actually thought some of the earlier speakers were fantastic. I thought Anthony, we had a little bit of a chat on the way out, was particularly great. I don't know how everybody else felt, but to me, the union of fractional ownership, together with some of the social media stuff that we're talking about, is incredibly powerful. Sweden is actually doing some really interesting work in this area too, and I think that there's much more that needs to happen. I thought what Jay said was interesting too about the introducing people to horses. I think that's something that I think is powerful and needs to be kind of integrated into things that we're doing. This whole thing wasn't something I was seeking out. I think you all know I spoke at a conference because people know that I was in social media, and I have a background in horses. I was asked to help this industry transform itself to become relevant again in a world of social and digital media where people live on iPhones and iPads and YouTubes and Googles and places, by the way, that we simply just weren't there. We're just nowhere to be found. I said then, and I certainly say now, that it's a process. This is a process that I've helped lead companies, including this hotel company, Hilton Hotels, is a client that I've been working with for 10 years. And and as you go through this process, I said there were several things about this. It's like, number one is, it's going to take time. Because first of all, think about where we're coming from. We're coming from really nothing. Number two, I said, along the way, not everything's going to go perfectly. There's going to be things that work well and some things that don't work well. And there's some things we're going to learn from, and there's things we're going to adjust, et cetera. And the third thing I'd say, the only thing that Ivan said this morning, I think, is I'd simply be a little disagree with is this isn't a conversion thing. I said this from the very beginning, that this wasn't about me. This was about us working together, because whether you work with us or me or work somewhere else, this process that I'm talking about, you have to go through, right? And again, it requires change and it requires analytics and everything else. Now, the challenge for us, make that a little bit more challenging, is that with most clients that we work with, and includes Johnson & Johnson and IBM, we have a client and they have a goal. Hilton Hotels cares about people like registering for hotel rooms. That's what they do. Here we're trying to solve many things, right? Nobody knew us online, and people who knew us, there wasn't very good perception of us. We're thinking about owners and visibility and awareness and driving wagering and doing all these things that everybody really wants to do. And eventually this all has to happen, right? But it's not going to happen easily. So in the original meeting in New York, when we did this, it was actually quite interesting. And we had a few folks, a couple different tracks. We had the USTA and the Hamiltonian Society, and the plan was, okay, everybody, the USTA will help support this foundational effort, right? The foundational effort is, think of it as building a house. We didn't have anything to start with, so we had to build assets, digital assets. So those are like fan zones and mobile apps and all those things, right? Because you need to have something to work with. Then at that point, the plan was for certain groups to start to come in and contribute certain amounts so that can really be pushed in supporting them, right? So the USTA, to the great, I think it's shown real leadership, I think, for the USTA and for the majority of the directors to kind of get behind this thing, because I think it's become the first sustained marketing effort that the sport has seen in quite some time, and I think we're at the precipice of something really important. But by the definition of what we do, the resources are limited. So we're talking about $250,000, right? And if it seems like a lot of money. Half of that goes to media and software and production. You guys saw the harness racing and fan zone video and all those things. So cut that all in half, right? And then that's what's left. And then we have to support multiple different tracks, or we can't even do multiple different tracks. We can do some races, et cetera, and we can help generate things that are really for the benefit of the industry. So what we've done is, the first year, I'm putting this up there because you've seen this before. The first year we did what we said. We built the foundation, right? We have the foundation of the house. Year two is about building audiences. So we got people start to visit the house. And that's what we've been doing, right? And testing some things out about, trying to point them to do certain things we want them to do. Year three, this is the critical year where you start to transition into having them do things that you really want them to do. And those are things like more owner acquisition and support wagering. I'm going to talk a little bit about what that looks like. But this is the process you kind of need to go through. So, sometimes people say, well, tangible results, wagering is up, or, we don't have data to be able to show the impact on wagering right now, because like ADWs and others have the data. We don't have the data, right? We don't know about ownership right now. And what does success look like long term? And I think this is a question everybody needs to ask themselves. I mean, ultimately, there's a principle in marketing called the AIDA principle. There's first awareness. They need to know you're there. Then they have to have some interest in what you do. Then you have to convince them to have some desire to get involved. And then they take an action. You have to go through that process. So the things that we're talking about, initially I presented a lot yesterday. It's about awareness. People who are viewing our stuff, How many people are going by the house and seeing us? And then there's engagement. How many people are kind of coming into the house and sharing our content or doing different things and things like that, right? Ultimately, someday, we're trying to kind of reverse some negative trends in the industry, which is going to take some time to stop the bleeding. Ultimately, you hope to start to turn this thing around and start to take this stuff in a positive direction. But this is a multi-year project. This is not stop and start. And I think that's essential, that if it's going to be stop and start, that you're not going to make the progress. No business exists without this type of marketing and sustained marketing over time. So some of the good things that happened last year was, we have now this foundation in place. We had 21 million views. That means people looked at our content 21 million times last year, right? And we were able to do some analytics and show that a lot of these people were not just in the harness racing business, because we were trying to target people who were they are thoroughbred owners and people, because with social media targeting, you can actually target by interest and location and a bunch of other things like that. So you're very precise. It's not just 21 million general people walking down the street. It's 21 million people who we've really targeted. And we've shown, showed a couple different things yesterday that I won't dive into, but the question has been posed sometimes, well, are we just talking to ourselves, or are we talking to new people? So we got at that in a couple different ways. We actually did a survey of the fans, right, and said, are you involved in the horse racing business or not? And more than 77% said, I'm not involved in the harness racing business. So those are new fans, right? And then, just to verify that that was true, we took the 41,000 fans likes that we have on Facebook now, which is, by the way, the largest harness racing community that's been built. And we actually compared all those people to see, are these people also at the USTA, are they fans of the USTA site, are the Meadowlands or Standardbred Canada and others, right? Because if they're inside the industry, they're probably fans are connected to those too. 62% of our fans were completely unique, right? They weren't part of those things. So, some success in terms of getting to new folks. We did, content's expanding, so this is an issue. One of the things that, I think frustration for sometimes, and you'll hear anecdotes from people who don't want to see this thing go forward or whatever it is, that, should be more photos on Instagram, or perhaps we should have done another video over here. And maybe probably could be. We're trying to solve a lot of people, we're trying to feed a lot of people, right? We have a bowl of porridge and about 100 kids, and there's not that much to kind of go around. So, of course, there's things that need to improve and get better. I'll be the first one to say that, and people might come out and say, well, we should have done, some people thought we should have done more for the World Drivers' Championship. We did a video, had 25,000 views. Maybe could there be more? Yeah, maybe, probably, right? The Hambletonian we supported. Online buzz about the Hambletonian went up 152% this year versus last year, right? Because there more we could do? Yeah, maybe, but there's certain things we could do, certain tracks, but maybe not as much support as we want. But part of that is because the partners, the original partners, kind of need to get involved to help take this stuff to the next level. The foundation's in place, but you can't scale this thing and do all those things you want to do unless other people start to get involved. The harness racing and history video, we created some really cool content. We call it evergreen content because we don't want to be, here's what the harness racing fan zone is and what it's not. The harness racing fan zone is a hub and spoke model. So we're taking the best content that's out there, right? And we're making it, and we're amplifying it to all these other people. We're not trying to become a publisher in the traditional sense to cannibalize stuff that Harness Racing Update, harnessracing.com, Harness Link and other do. We're not trying to do that because, or Standardbred Canada, because first of all, why do we want to do that? We want actually them to be our partners. And we also want to kind of unify them together. So Daryl's here from Standardbred Canada, and we've had conversations and said, well, if you guys start to get into the hard news, the hard news and all that stuff, like inside baseball, we can't really cooperate with you because you're going to steal people who would be visiting us, and we sell advertising against it. So we have to kind of live at this kind of higher level. So we created things like that we call evergreen content, stuff that has a long life and really appeals to people new and crossover potential fans. So for example, we did the harness racing history video, and has everybody seen it? I hope. Okay, wow, actually, we might have to play it sometime. It's 5 minutes, but I'm not going to do it to you today. With $1,500 in media support, we've had more than 400,000 people view it. I mean, that's powerful, and this is the kind of content that we really want to create. So we also did a couple other things. We wanted to show, and maybe we got ahead of ourselves a little bit, but we wanted to show, now that we're building these audiences, can we use it for kind of ownership recruitment, right? So we did a test, small test, and said we targeted for people who had high income, $300,000 plus, had interest in horses, thoroughbred owners, sports betting and everything else. And we did some ads. I'll show them to you, but I'll get to that. And we said, you know, can we get people to raise their hand and say, hey, I'm potentially interested in being a horse owner? In a small test, we had 230 people raise their hands and say, yeah, I'm interested, right? But that happened in the fall, and then the issue became, you know, kind of breaks down a little bit. And this is why I need you guys, if we're going to continue this thing, to get involved, because we can get people to say, hey, I'm interested in horses. And by the way, I can tell you what zip code they live in and what track they're next to, et cetera. But we personally, on our side, within the scope we do, have a really hard time of converting them. Like, does the USTA send them to different trainers? What trainers do you do? What happens there, right? So when I hear Anthony talking about what he's doing, that's so important for what we do. We got to marry this stuff up. And so, yes, we could be blamed in saying, like, hey, we haven't really gone back to them and converted them yet, but I wanted to test to see if it could work, and it works. So now we know it costs us about $125 a lead. So you want to get to a cost per lead, right? Of how much it costs to get somebody who could be a potentially qualified owner. So we would now like to scale that out. And the beautiful thing is we can do it by state and zip code. So anybody who, you know, contributes, we can make sure that that money is actually going to support the state that we want. We also have had incredible collaboration in some areas, not everywhere. We've had, you know, some of the tracks, I say Hoosier Park and the Meadowlands has been helpful. We've actually had incredible collaboration with our Australian and Swedish friends, because they recognize, and some of you were probably sent letters, there were a lot of letters flying around, right? Some of you were sent some letters from Harness Racing Australia, who said that they were amazed at how much we really accomplished in such a short amount of time, and they really would like to model what they're doing after us, and they're looking to collaborate on the fan zone and other things as well. By the way, I was looking the other day, the population of Australia is 23 million people, and they're spending $750,000 on doing the same things that we're trying to do here, and they think that they're underfunded. Sweden has said the same thing. In fact, Sweden said to us, we think what you're doing has great promise, but you guys need to get more aggressive, frankly. You're kind of, their budget is $1.5 million with a $25 million video production budget, because they do reality TV and things too. So they want to work with us. In fact, we're talking about, they've said that they want to do a global center of excellence where we'll all work together, because what happens in this world of digital, whether you live in New Jersey or you live in Perth, Australia, on Twitter or on Facebook, you know, you're right, you're neighbors, aren't you? And we're all impacting the brand of harness racing, so we all need to kind of work together in that way. And we have the basis of that starting to happen. I would also add, I know the NTRA is here. I did a panel with digital marketing at the Arizona Symposium this year with the NTRA, and following that, they came to us to talk about having ways that we can collaborate together. In fact, Jay said something really that I agree with completely, right? Which is, we believe we're harness racing and quarter horse and thoroughbreds, but to new and potential fans, we're just horse racing. That's the brand. And then there's sub-brands, harness racing and quarter horses and everything else. So the kind of conversations that we're having are, you know, if we go to Facebook, now Facebook is creating a new program called Stadium to kind of do like live feeds during kind of the sporting events. And they're doing it for the NHL, and they're doing it for basketball right now. If we go there as harness racing and say, hey guys, knock on the door, would you please consider creating a product around us? I mean, look, they're not going to get anywhere. If we do it under the auspices of horse racing, then we may have some more leverage in the negotiations. You know, that also goes to YouTube, and it goes to a bunch of other things as well. So anyhow, the foundation is placed. I want to move this thing along because I can dwell for a long time on these things. I just wanted to show you, we have 5 minutes. So the views, I'm going to show you, so I'm going to tell you the things that we can show you. Like, we know how many people have seen our stuff and how many people engage. So in 2013, when we started this thing, 983,000 people saw stuff. It was then 1.3 million last year. No, I'm sorry, 13.5 million last year, and now it's up to 21 million essentially this year. The engagement, those are people who've come in the house. So these aren't people just looking at our house. People who've gone in and done something with us. Went from 3,600 to 286,000 to 652,000. We can debate numbers, but you certainly can't debate that the numbers are pointed in the right direction, right? So, you know, I think that's critical, because at the end of the day, we got to look at the numbers. We can do anecdotes all day in terms of this went well, this didn't go well, I wish there was more photo here and everything else. I can't respond to those individually. What I can respond to is with data. And what the data says this, and I would also say we did a study, we did a market research study of harness racing fan zone fans and said, how helpful has this stuff been for you? And more than 80% came back and says either gone from moderately helpful to extremely helpful. But there's more that can happen there. I'm the first to admit, but there's more content we need. But as a hub and spoke model, we can't go out there and pull it out all the time. We need pipelines from you all and tracks and other things so that we can start to pull this stuff in, right? Otherwise, it's kind of hurting cats, and that's a little bit difficult to do sometimes. So the digital foundation is in place. The ambassador program, people go around, and the more they tweet and stuff, they collect points. They can redeem them for bobbleheads or T-shirts or other things as well, just like Major League Baseball has, just as the NFL has, just as the Pittsburgh Steelers have. We have a harness racing fan zone. We have mobile apps for both Android and for iOS. So I hope that a lot of people have downloaded the mobile app here. If you don't, it's really simple to do. It's free. It'll take you 15 seconds. You go to the iTunes store or you go to Google Play and you download it. And in it is really cool stuff. You have videos, you have photos, you have harness racing update is integrated, so all that content is there. You have podcasts, Ryan Macedonia, and Post Time with Mike and Mike. Like everything you need in terms of horse racing is in the mobile app. And by the way, it lives on your phone, and there's an icon right there. And all you have to do is people click on it, and you're now living in the world of harness racing. Now, there are things that need to be added to that, and it gets really kind of exciting. Like, imagine that we can take that further and start to say, okay, now you can watch live racing, and now you can even bet through this platform. Pick your ADW that you want to work with, and you can go from there. And there's also social platforms. So we get very Facebook-centric, and Facebook is a big part of this. But there's also Pinterest and other platforms as well. But 2016 is now the new year. So we're at this precipice, and I will simply say this. I think today is a critical day in the history of the sport in some ways, because either we move forward and build on top of what we built, improve and scale and learn and work together for the common good, or we kill it. And if we kill it, I don't know how this ever comes back, or something like this that comes back. We're looking to do several things. So we want to kind of get a little focused here. We want to continue to expand out. So we have to continue to get more and more people seeing our stuff and engaging with our stuff and building audiences. Because, by the way, what we built, when we have audiences and we have this platform, we now have an asset. And we have an asset that is valuable, and it is an asset that we can barter with, and it is an asset that we can monetize. The USTA is talking about we need more streams of revenue. Well, this starts to become a stream of potential revenue, and I'm going to show you tangibly what I'm talking about in a minute. We're looking to get 2,000 more owner leads. Now, we need your help. What do we do with them? Is it fractional ownership? Do we work with the various states? Do we hand them off? I mean, I'm not going to solve that by myself. I would love to see some people come together and help us solve that issue, because it's, conversion around that stuff is difficult. We want to support wagering. So we did something small for the Hambletonian this year, where we said, wouldn't it be cool if we could do these online coupons so people are online and they can download a coupon and do some media around it, and then they could take it to the track and they could redeem it for a mystery voucher for wagering. We had over 600 people in a very small test. 600 people showed up to the Meadowlands and they bet. So we went from offline to online, and that's really powerful. I want to expand that as well. And okay, and then the other thing is we're talking about the Harness Racing TV channel. So I'm going to get to this because I think this is incredibly important. The future of television in many ways isn't on the typical TV as you think about, right? It's here. So because we have an asset, we can start to do partnerships and deals. So we have the initial outline of a relationship with Roberts to create a harness racing channel. They're going to create it anyhow, but we do it in terms of with Roku, which means if any of you have Roku, we're creating a harness racing channel that can be on your television set where we can put our own content in the free section, replays and promo videos and things like that. And people click through for live racing. So for you tracks, you're going to get your more distribution of your channel. And by the way, they're going to pay us, the USTA, 20% lifetime value of all those things that happen, right? Of all that thing that we can generate. Maybe it'll start small, but it's a revenue generation tool. And I think this is absolutely, this is really, really powerful over time. Now I will say, because I told Tom I would say this, I still think the Hambletonian should be on CBS Sportsnet. But I think the future of television is this, and for us to have a channel and a direct distribution that we can then integrate with the mobile app and everything else is really powerful, and I think something we really want to do. So I've been, I felt a little bit yesterday I had to kind of I feel a little like having to say things on my behalf, and I really don't want to do that because I never wanted it to be about me. You know, I have a lot of other things. I just have a passion for the sport, and I care about this stuff. So in the world of social media, I simply just posted some conversations that were up there last night from people like Tony Alaga, Yannick, John Campbell, Dave Pallone, Crawford Farms. There's a million letters out there in support of this. I'll say there's some detractors, but I also think that detractors need to really kind of understand what we're trying to do and work with us productively to be able to make it better, not simply try to kill something because they don't like certain aspects of it. And with this final slide, I'll simply say this. I think this is something from DRF saying, I think, you know, leadership is leading people into the future, right? It's not trying to pull people backwards. I think we have the path forward to be able to do something really special and create potentially the first cross-collaboration initiative that outside because I think in my conversations with some of other groups we have out there, some tracks, some horseman groups, good conversations with Pennsylvania and Ohio and others who are trying to figure out how they can get on board and start to kind of get much more involved with this, and also Australia and Sweden and others. We may have the opportunity for the first true cross-collaboration marketing initiative driven through social and digital media that will be transformative over time. But, you know, certainly if the USDA needs to take leadership here, and I'm going to thank all the directors who have shown leadership around this so far to date, and we'll see what happens from here. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Rob. I appreciate it very much.
If you can give us that mic, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, Jason, I'd be happy to. The relationship's been a very productive, very easy one. Rob came in with a huge amount of knowledge about the industry, so we didn't need to bring him up to speed on that. And he also came in with a huge amount of knowledge and affinity for the social media world, which we simply didn't have. Topher came from Google, came over to Conversion, knew nothing about harness racing, and dove into it like you would hope anyone would, and really fell in love with the sport. There's a great synergy between our office and Conversion's. I think we've gotten just a couple of things, because I've been quiet on this issue, I guess, and it is the board's decision as to where you want to drive us. For what it's worth, my opinion is this. This is the right road that we're on, and given our financial parameters, it's probably the only road that we can take that will make a difference. Conversion knows way more than we do in this arena, and more than anyone that I've encountered. And we did vet out another agency, and I've got some other acquaintances in the field. We're getting these services cheaper than we should be getting them. They're kind of, I don't want to say underwater. It's probably more opportunity cost than anything else. But I can tell you with certainty that I believe we are getting well more than we are paying for. And I'm one of those people who certainly sees many shades of gray. And I've talked to a bunch of you, and some people have come up with some pretty logical arguments as to why they will not be voting to approve this funding. But if it comes down to metrics, if it comes down to effort, I don't think that there's a question that what has happened thus far has exceeded our expectations, certainly has exceeded mine. And I hope that we stay on this road. So thank you for the question. Marilyn.
Marilyn?
Yeah, microphone,
Yeah,
Marilyn.
microphone, please.
One of the documents that we received by email, the board, in the last few days, was a 2016 plan, update plan. Are you familiar with what I'm talking about? Mm-hmm. One of the sections was what's the budget breakdown. And it showed the budget from last year, which was very general. There was not much detail. In the next paragraph, it says details of the 2016 budget goal are available. But does someone have a handout with those details?
Yeah, I can speak from the USDA perspective in terms of our budget and what we're investing. The breakdown that you're referring to is Conversion specific, so I'm going to defer to Rob at this point to answer that.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. I mean, I would love to spend a half an hour, but we can't. But we'll answer that question.
Yeah, let me simply say, there's a full breakdown of 2015, and what you'll see is like the overages of we put in about $200,000 of services on top of what we got. I don't bill any of my time, by the way. I should probably tell you guys that. 2016, there's one available. The 2016 budget, by the way, is to do all the things I just talked about are going to require, in addition to what the USTA puts in, we're trying to get some other groups to kind of come in and collaborate, especially around the ownership recruitment, because if you think about $125 per lead, and I said 2,000 leads, just do the math. That's going to require like folks like Ohio Horsemen and others to start to get involved with that stuff. So it's a little aspirational, because what I'm hoping is with this leadership that other people will come on board to get to where we need to go. But I have the breakdown of all that. So I'd be happy to, I'm happy to get it out. I'll work with these guys to get it out sometime like next week or something, if that's fine. I could give you, I suppose I could give you something. Yeah. So I leave it to the finance guy here.
All right.
So that's fine.
Yeah, and if we have other questions, if you come to the Finance Committee tomorrow morning, because we will discuss this in more depth, so